Good evening. Good evening. Discussing metaphysics, worldviews, God, religion. Please, guys, jump on in. I'm supposed to have a guest tonight to discuss these things, debate these things with me, kind of challenge each other on some ideas, but he may or may not show, so I didn't really want to advertise it like that. But anyone else is really free to jump on in, man, if you want to discuss metaphysics. You want to talk about God, talk about philosophy. I'm game, man. And we'll see if other people want to show up and we can kind of create like an open discussion room tonight here on the channel. But yeah, we'll give him a few minutes to see if he'll actually show up, because we're going to talk about different views like religious views, Christianity, theism, idealism, naturalistic idealism, atheism, different topics that we've been going back and forth about. And I figured, hey, let's get on live and share this conversation with the world, with my community, man. And let's see what other people have to say about, some of the things we're discussing and conclusions we're kind of drawing. Um, but yeah, let's see what he's got to say. I don't know if he's going to show up or not. He said it's kind of iffy. Hopefully he will, man. But in the meantime, guys, please like and subscribe to the channel. I want to build a community where we can discuss these things on the regular and really grow a community. I call it a conscious community, because we're kind of all on a journey of life. And by thinking about things deeply, like philosophy, metaphysics, religion, things like that, it's all part of our journey. It becomes part of our evolution through this life. And I've come a long way from really hardly any real religious background to a very strong religious experience when I was a Jehovah Witness back in my early 20s for a number of years. And I tried other religions too. And I left there just kind of searching for myself. And eventually just kind of became, the typical angry atheist type, considered myself a skeptic. And the one thing that got me out of Jehovah's Witnesses and Christianity as an option for me was learning more about epistemology. Like, how do I know the things that I know? And I wasn't really that great at it, but it was enough for me to get out of the religious thinking and being a theist. I realized I really didn't have any really good reasons to profess the kind of beliefs that I did, right? And but I wanted to make sure if I was leaving these beliefs behind, that it was for good reasons also. Some people can doubt for bad reasons. Like, was I leaving because of other people? Somebody hurt my feelings? Was it because I didn't like how the church was run, and so I just didn't believe in God anymore because of the congregation or people? Or no, it had to be something really um, legitimate, which would be not being convinced of the claims. So, like, if you're claiming that, Jesus was divine, he lived, he died, and was resurrected on the third day, and that if you can admit to yourself that you're a sinner in need of forgiveness, and you believe that Jesus died for your sins as a sacrifice, like the ultimate scapegoat for your sins through his blood magic. Did I really believe that kind of stuff? I realized I really had no good reason other than just the Bible says it. And so I kind of did a train of thought where I was like, well, can I trust the Bible? And then I said, well, the Bible talks about true things. Egypt really existed. Israel really existed. Rome really existed. Greece really existed. Um, there's evidence of seashells at the top of mountains and stuff. So maybe there really was a worldwide flood. People are mean to each other. People are evil. There's great suffering in the world. This would be consistent, at least, with the story that I was told, about sin and the fall and all of that. So, I believed it. But what outside of that, was there any reason? No, not as I saw it. David, how's it going, man?
Not too bad. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm just waiting on interlocutor to jump in at any minute. Hopefully he will. I've pinged him just now and he doesn't seem to be responding. So if not, it's no big deal. I'm just kind of freelancing right now, kind of talking a little bit about my history as an ex Jehovah Witness and Christian and all of that good stuff. And for anybody that's watching, that's going to watch the video, they'll kind of have a little background on me, and maybe you too, if you want to share your experience. Is that something you'd feel free to do?
I mean, I could do as much as it comes along.
Sure. Well, I was just kind of explaining that, back when I was a Jehovah Witness, I met an atheist at the job I was working at one particular time, right? And we used to always argue about religion. And of course, he was an atheist, so he didn't believe in God and stuff like that. So he would always challenge me, and I always thought his arguments were kind of silly and stupid. But then he kind of really started using what would nowadays be called street epistemology, where he would just
Okay.
start asking me key questions about why I believe what I believe. And it kind of bothered me, man, because I'd go home and like, yeah, I don't think I really gave a good answer. The answer I gave, when I think about it, is kind of stupid. And so he gave me books to read. He's like, you're giving me all these watchtowers and Bibles, verses, and things. Let me give you some things to read. And of course, Jehovah's Witnesses aren't really supposed to take other literature. And we're not supposed
Right.
to look at other information that's contrary to our beliefs, because it's a massive cult. But I did it anyways. And I started reading some books he gave me. I think the first book he gave me was Cows, Wars, Wit, and Witches. I forgot who wrote that book, but it was basically a historical rundown of how, religions got started over time and superstitions got started over time, like, worshiping cows and, going to war and all of these sort of things, and how religion tied into that stuff. And so I thought, oh, that was kind of piqued my interest and kind of clued me on a lot of stuff. And then he let me read an Ayn Rand book. Ayn Rand is like a philosopher, a Russian philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. So I read that novel. And that was it, man. It was enough in there to where it really just triggered a lot of questions, about rationality, reason, objectivity, um, and how being selfish is actually a good thing because it's healthy for you and for society. Selfishness in the right kind of context, you might say. So, anyways, whether you believe it or not, or a lot of it I've just kind of discarded over the years, but it was just enough at that time to really make me question a lot of things. And so I kind of came off of that religion that way. And so, I was married at the time, and my wife was also a Jehovah Witness, and she couldn't really understand what I was doing. But then she was doubting too, but just didn't want to come out and say it like I did. So we both left the religion together, and and so yeah, we started living a more secular kind of life, and life was better because we got out of the cult and stuff like that. But a lot of people would ask me, like, they'd say, well, aren't you, like friends? They would say, well, aren't you really just throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses was a cult. You know, just because you were stuck in a cult doesn't make God not true. I mean, but it took a long time for me to really express, and come up with questions for why I actually left. Like there's epistemic questions that are unanswered. And, and throughout life after that, I became like a more angry sort of atheist to where I wanted to disabuse people of their beliefs. And I wanted to really challenge people and show them how dumb it was and stupid they were. And just went about it really in a unhealthy way. That went on for years back and forth, because then I also had another side of my brain, because I've kind of got a right side of my brain. I'm a creative person. So being creative, sometimes what comes along with that, from what a lot of psychologists will tell you, is that you have a lot of imaginary thinking. You have a lot of wishful thinking, or you kind of have, or I would say idealistic sort of thinking. And so this can be good and bad. If you're too left-brained, you can be so creative that you don't have any sort of constraint, no logical constraints on your beliefs. You never question anything. But
right. It
all
becomes maladaptive.
Yeah, exactly. And I always do these tests. They have these different tests to see, are you more right brain, you're more left brain, and I'm right down the middle. I'm like straight down the middle. I've taken dozens of these sort of tests, even for jobs and stuff. And when I was in California, I went for this sales job selling captioning and stuff like that, like subtitles and captioning for movies in Hollywood and stuff like that. And part of what they wanted to do was like, know what kind of thinker are you? What kind of problem solver are you? And so they take this test and like, man, you were right down the middle. You were like right brained and left brained. Like I've always got that result, And a lot of psychologists will say, yeah, that's fortunately, a very healthy way to be. Means you can have creative beliefs, but you also know how to challenge them. You know how to keep them in check. You're a balanced person.
Like I
So
was saying, challenging
yeah,
the dichotomous mind,
yes,
because
yes,
it's constantly seeking to place it in this box or that box.
yep, yep. And I hate boxes. I hate boxes. Like I'm not a very good box. That's part of what drove me out of the religion was, it was so much pressure to stay in and so much responsibility heaped on me. I didn't have a chance to really face what I was really feeling inside, because inside I was so dissatisfied. I'm like, I feel like I'm in a box. Like I'm not able to question these things. I'm not able, but I also had this peer pressure to, you got to preach the truth. You got to push those things out of your mind. That's your sin. That's your sin side coming in, and it's just trying to mislead you. So I was full of these, and my imaginary side would go to work, and it was just a mess. And finally I learned how to kind of strike a balance, and I'm always striking a balance, and I understand even now I have beliefs that a lot of people may feel are kind of weird or strange, but I have a logical path to it. So I kind of have like a right brained belief system, possibly, but I have our left brain sort of pathway to make it make sense. It's like that's how I operate. That's how I'm wired up, and everybody is different, And
Yeah.
I think the best we can do is just kind of be genuine, and at least try to challenge, always try to challenge and look for others to challenge you. And that's exactly why I wanted to do the show tonight with uh with the guy, and I don't think he's coming through. He hadn't responded, so I was
Is this
hoping.
someone that I'm familiar with?
No, you're not familiar with this guy. He's more
Okay.
of a he's a Christian, but he's not the same guy that I was referring to. But yeah. So, anyways, hopefully other people will get. I kind of spammed out the show in different groups. Hopefully people will show up. again, feel free to join, like, and subscribe if you want to be part of the community and jump in, and we can have these sort of discussions and talks and be positive for each other and be there for each other as, a community should be, and let's be open. Let this be a safe space where we can talk about competing views and not get angry about it and not get butt hurt about it. Let's be adults about shit. And 'cause I love to talk. I love to express myself about things that I feel strongly about. And I know I already understand I'm probably most likely wrong about everything that I say as far as my metaphysical and philosophical belief. I already know that. So don't think that you're gonna hurt my feelings by stepping on they're big feet, and I don't care. But I understand one thing, and part of the reason that my beliefs are what they are is I start off this way. I think, therefore I am. So the fundamental thing is that, I am conscious and that everything is sort of based on that. And it's not even assumption, it's just a self-evident fact. So our understanding of reality is rooted in your consciousness. I think, therefore I am. And our ability to be aware of our own existence forms the foundation of, say, like logic and reasoning. You can't exist and not exist simultaneously and in the same sense. So this is like the basis of classical logic. And the simple fact that we are conscious, this allows us to navigate the world, make sense of our surroundings, engage in meaningful thought. The very act of us being aware of ourselves really means that we can sort of affirm one basic truth. We cannot exist and not exist at the same time within that same context, like I said. And this awareness is sort of the cornerstone of the logic. However, the logic does not really guarantee that what we experience is the full truth of reality. It's merely our way of making sense of the world through the lens of our limited perception. And we've talked about that a lot, Dave, like how the mind is limited and dichotomous and, illusory. And, it's always trying to fool us. The brain is really good at that. It's always trying to pull the wool over our eyes, you know.
Yeah. So it's always trying to simplify things. Like I said, to put it into this tiny compartment, this little box, or this box.
Yeah, exactly. And like reason and logic and rationality, that stuff is kind of like long-term sort of thinking. It's like stuff you sit back and let me ponder this idea. Let me connect the dots if I can. But then, in daily life, we have to create shortcuts, like we just have to make decisions on the fly, and it's like, what tools can we use that are really going to help us in that regard and be more, you know, um, certain about our decisions, And like I did a video yesterday about intuition, like maybe building that intuitive muscle can
I was
help
going
us
to
get
mention that.
better. Yeah, 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 yeah. And you kind of keyed me off on that too. I think one of our conversations we had, Dave, you were talking about that intuition. I think we were kind of touched a little bit on that on one of our videos or something. You were saying, yes, I look at it that as like intuition, and if you get good at it, you can really start, you know, making fast decisions. And I started looking at that, and it's really true, man. It's like they have tests now where I was watching one the other night, man, where they can put two visuals in both your eyes, one in this eye, one in that eye, and the one that's brighter will overshadow the other image. But that image is unconsciously going into your brain. It's going in your eye and it's being processed in your brain. But the only thing you really see is the one image that's maybe brighter in your right eye, right? And so then they'll say, they'll ask you some kind of question related to the other thing you saw that you're not aware of. And you'll answer in a way like you saw that picture, but you don't remember seeing that picture, and it's like, how did, because I don't know, I just had a gut feeling. I just had a feeling that That was the right answer. And some people don't answer the right way. And then they'll say, well, I kind of, and then after the thing is over, they'll admit, they're like, yeah, I did have a strong feeling, but I just didn't trust it. It didn't make any sense. So I didn't really trust that gut feeling or whatever. It's like, no, you had that gut feeling because we actually pumped some information in your brain you were unaware of, which that's really wild if you think about it. Think about all the information you take in every day.
More than we can process, that's for sure. Well,
Yeah,
more
you're
than we
not
can process consciously.
consciously right. And so in the
I think
thing
that's
there,
that.
hmm
I
go
was
ahead.
just saying, I think for some people that is slightly possible, and I think that's what leads to insanity, because then
Yeah,
they're attempting to place all the connections, and it just overwhelms them.
yeah, yeah. And like, so one of the questions that came out of that whole thing, they were saying, well, you're saying it was unconscious, but unconscious to who? Who is the one that's being, and that brought up this whole other thing. And the neuroscientist said, well, that's a good question. And when we say unconscious, we're kind of also again using shortcut language, but actually the consciousness is always there. Like he was saying, like, even though you're not, like when I say you, like what you're conscious of, that's who you are. You in this context is the guy that opens his eyes and see the world in front of him. But there's another you that's also just as conscious. It's just as conscious, but it's just not in you. It's another person, if you will, right? And so it's like that person can't use language. They can't use language. So you will never hear a voice in your head tell you anything. But what it can do is send signals to your skin, signals to your heart rate, signals to your breathing, signals to your gut. And this is how it communicates. But it's there and it's conscious and it's trying to talk to you. You just have to
Well,
listen to it.
I think in cases of dissociative identity disorder, the brain does attempt to
Yeah.
communicate, but by fabricating a different identity or alter
Yeah.
in order to relay to you. And I think it's also done through dreams as well.
Dreams. That's right. All that, what we call unconscious processing.
Mhm.
Um, and I think we had talked about, Michael Levin, who says it's even worse than that. It kind of gets down to the cellular level. Like, all consciousness is sort of a collective. And he says, and then, the question that people always ask him, well, how far does it go? Like, where does it bottom out? And he's like, well, it kind of just goes on and on and on. We can't really say. It's just, you can talk about bioelectricity and where the memories and the other forms of cognition, but where does that come from? And I guess his whole thing is that it sort of goes to this empty sort of place of no this or that, and there's no subject object split as in our normal consciousness. It's kind of just he doesn't know what to call it. I think he calls it a platonic form or something, kind of like what a platonic form is, right? Like it's kind of like it's a ancient Greek philosophical term that usually points to like where all ethics, mathematics, rationality, logic sort of resides, not as a thing, but kind of as this form, invisible form that's just out there in the ether. And the conscious mind sort of just latches onto it, or there's some sort of demodulation that happens. I don't know, like it's kind of like an information state or or a raw data sort of structure where all your these sort of I don't know how to explain it, but they're sort of like fundamentals, like I guess in philosophical terms it'd be called simples. So it's like a form of simples, and you draw from that. So it's really weird. And so Michael Levin says, something like that, whether you believe that language or not, it's something sort of like that, you would imagine. But really, no one knows. I mean, we're getting into metaphysics and stuff. Some people call it God. Some people call it Platonic forms. Some people will call it the greater mind, or Buddhists
Yeah,
will call it just emptiness.
yeah. I think it's just an example of placing the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
That the Platonic form is inherent to the structure of the human identity itself, and
Hmm.
this has developed over time, and it's passed on genetically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why some, and that's where intuition comes from. Because a lot of this, I mean, I don't like to use code or design language, but
Right.
we're pre-coded to perceive certain things. Um, in the case of pareidolia, you know,
Hmm.
um, facial recognition is one of those. We're pre-coded for that. Otherwise, faces would just be a blur.
Right. Right. Right.
I forget the name. I forget the name of that condition, where some people just they cannot see faces. It's just they just see eyes and a mouth.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'll have to look into it. But to get back
Yeah.
to what you were saying earlier about perception, do you remember the dress back in 2015,
Yep. The color dress.
where it
Yeah.
was
There's
where it
orange.
was
I mean,
black and gold?
gold, or yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was black and blue or white and gold.
Right.
For me, I saw it kind of in between, where it was kind of black and gold, but I mean black and blue, but also white and gold.
Mm.
In a sense, it's weird.
I saw white and gold. I remember that.
So the primary colors are black and blue, but it has overtones of white and gold.
Hmm.
For me at least.
Yeah. So yeah, like perception, I guess, is someone like a Deepak Chopra would say it's species
Exactly.
specific. He'd be like, yeah, the way you see things is species specific. There's another physicist though that has a more rigorous way to put it, and and basically his idea was that you know the universe, the reality of the universe depends on what kind of observer you are. So if you're the kind of observer that sees things a particular kind of way, then reality is going to present itself to you in that way, which seems kind of common sense. But then he takes it to its logical extremes into the physics realm and makes a lot of interesting conclusions. Like I think he calls it the Ruliad. I don't know if you remember. I think his name is David Wolfram, but yeah, really interesting guy. And there's all sorts of, I noticed these days, since consciousness has really started becoming a topic that science is willing now to discuss. Now we start seeing all these different models of consciousness. Like, I went and counted them up. I think we have like 26 different models of consciousness right now, which is crazy. When you think, if you know something, there's usually only one overriding theory. Like, there's a theory of evolution by natural selection, and there may be subsets to that, or different things that talk about different things, but overall, it's just evolution. We understand it. Um, the Big Bang models, like the consensus view, um, things change over time, but for the most part, some of these big theories like evolution, the Big Bang, origins, they all sort of stayed consistent over time, and they just kind of add, if anything, to those. Very rarely do you get like a paradigm shift, kind of like from Newton to Einstein and things like that. But for consciousness, it's like we've got 26 of them motherfuckers. It's like nobody knows what it is. Everybody's has all these different hypotheses that no one can really have a consensus on. So it's really a deep mystery.
It's a new frontier, really.
Yes, it really is. And it's been I think neglected. I think
Yeah.
if Newton, if you, let's say you were to raise Newton from the dead and bring him back, Isaac Newton would probably say to all these scientific questions about, consciousness, he'd probably be like, well, look, that's exactly why I did things the way I did it. It's like science is about what we can measure, objectively verify. You know, consciousness is one of those things that's kind of outside the purview. It's one of those things that, a third person point of view isn't really going to totally explain. It can only explain it from a person perspective. Whereas the first person is really what consciousness is. It's the subjective, private, first person experience of life. And I think that's why science for so long has sort of neglected the whole topic altogether. But now with neuroscience, with treatment for different experiences that people go through, like schizophrenia, a host of, DID, dissociative disorder, it's become more in the forefront. But for me, the way I look at that, David, is that they're sort of looking at, still they're engaging in third person science, because that's all you really can do. I think the folks that have done the first person science were the Buddhists. They've been doing mindfulness and meditation and going inward for thousands of years. And I think there's something you can learn from any culture that has spent that much time doing a science of anything. I think you should respect them. You should at least give it a shot, give them a chance to, hear what kind of wisdom have they learned over the years, and, I don't know. It seems like consciousness is one of those things where, um, you know, it's there's only one way to really understand it. That's from the first person, but that doesn't tell you anything about where does it come from. You know, like, I don't care how much you meditate. I don't think you'll ever get in touch with the neurons that are firing in your head. You're never going to be in touch with that side of it. Yet all of that stuff is very important for how you're processing that information, right?
Well, I think you can,
Oh,
in a certain sense, through like
okay.
when you experience epiphany or like
Mhm.
eureka moments. I think that's when you're consciously connecting the dots.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So in a sense, you are kind of experiencing it, but not directly, because
Right.
you can't directly experience the interior workings of the brain. I mean, we can visually if we dissect it and all that, but
Hmm. Yeah, that's the whole thing. And and I like talking about some of the deeper questions, like, these days in science, the real big thing. I was just watching Philip Goff's latest interview. He's one of these consciousness fundamentalist people. His view on it is a more materialistic, like a material slash idealistic sort of, like, he's trying to combine materialism with idealism to create this, to where both are fundamental. Like, he's saying it's not just consciousness is fundamental. Why can't matter just be just as, I mean, why arbitrarily pick one or the other? Why not just say both of them are fundamental?
yeah, I agree.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and he makes a good point, and he says that maybe within consciousness itself, I mean, within matter itself, is sort of this other dimension to it, like this, what it's like to be that thing. And and so a lot of the critics, of course, will say, well, now you're talking about chairs and tables and atoms and neutrons and photons are, having dreams of life and, blah blah blah. And he's like, no, that's not what that means. It's like, that's what you call a higher evolved form of consciousness. But I guess what he's trying to say is that there's this sort of proto consciousness, or this sort of you know, bare minimum of awareness. Like just the fact that two things can interact from each other is in itself a form of awareness in a very unimaginable way. From that, as you get more complexity, you know, you get more and more complicated uh, conscious states to where you have like a human brain that does everything that it does. And that's only because you've now got, you know, trillions of neurons and, you know, cells interacting with one another. So now consciousness is now at this human level consciousness, you know, but there's still this same baseline awareness this that anybody can get in touch with. Like if you do enough deep meditation, you can sort of get into that stillness, that I amness, you know, sort of like the stage on which you dance, you know, sort of thing. And that thing cannot be harmed. It can't be, you know, tweaked out. It's just an observer. It's just there to observe the higher states of consciousness at play. And his theory is that, you know, I think that thing right there that we're talking about is at the base level of matter itself. And that's what we're really talking about when we talk about you know, panpsychism, you know, the consciousness part. It's probably just some very base level impersonal sort of thing. And the only problem, you know, of course, critics will come up and there's philosophical problems, and even he admitted it on the show. It's like, well, the problem with that theory is you have to understand how do you get over the composition, you know, the composition problem, you know, the problem of compos division fallacy. It's like, how does the consciousness, how does just adding more matter going to enrich the experience, even if you have a little bit of experience sort of in the recipe, so to speak? How does just combining that make a conscious thing happen, like a higher form, you know? And
Well, I was
he
saying,
can't answer that, but that's the question, you know.
well, my explanation for that is that it's accumulated states of awareness that are developed through different forms of sensory reception, and that
Hmm.
the conscious state is basically just the driver's seat for all of that.
Hmm.
Uh, just for basic navigation in
Yeah.
the environment, in its host environment.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And that's kind of where he's fallen in at. It's like, well, maybe philosophically and logically I can't really explain how the dots sort of match, but reality isn't necessarily supposed to just, you know, be, you know, at our whim, you know, to, if it doesn't make sense to us, then it's not real. Like that's not reality. Like we don't determine what reality is. Reality
Right,
determines itself on its own terms. Like
right. And that,
just
that
because
that's why
we
we
don't
need
understand.
to.
Yeah.
Well, that's just saying that's why we need to like work on achieving a state of non-being in order to correctly um, perceive things. Well, not correctly,
Mm,
but as accurately as possible without letting our filters get in the way.
right.
'Cause That's
So
that,
when you
that's a big part of the problem.
so yeah, so let's unpack that a little bit. What does non-being mean in your view?
It really just set like internally separating yourself from your identity, basically, like who you are, what you've developed into, your experiences, basically attempting to just separate from that in a sense.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Like just become
To
detached from too much of the attachment to certain concepts and things that we take for granted maybe.
well, really just everything, whether
Mhm.
it's taken for granted or not. Basically, just retracing backwards until you get
Mhm.
until you get inside to the subconscious. Not that that's the actual
Oh,
thing, but
Hmm. I wonder what would that look like in your view?
I I the way I describe it, it's like unwinding the coil. So from our experiences, we always project, and anytime we receive any sort of pushback or interference, it comes back to us. And then as that continues to happen, we get coiled up. So what we
Hmm.
need to do is just uncoil and get back to the source.
Right, right.
So
So
that's
is that
basically
possible? Maybe somebody would say it's impossible to sort of. It's almost like trying to become non-human in a way, like trying to
well,
stop being a human in the way we think or whatever. But maybe what you're saying is you're a little more optimistic that we can actually transcend our human tendency to be that way. I don't know.
I think I think we can, yeah. But
Yeah.
it takes effort, and that's what most people aren't willing to contribute. They want the
Right.
easy solution because that's the way the dichotomous brain works. This
Hmm. This or that. Right. Right. Exactly. That's right. And because a lot of times, like whenever I talk about idealism, for example, or atheism, for example, or whatever, I talk about it analytically. So in other words, I'm not trying to say this is how reality has to work, or what I'm saying is these are easy arguments to make for or against a certain thing based on this particular framework. So we can analytically decide, well, this is a framework we're going to go with, maybe classical logic. And then we'll say, well, within classical logic, how can we, you know, connect the dots for idealism or theism or something like that? And we can try to work that out within that framework of classical logic. Well, I can easily do it for idealism. I feel comfortable with doing that, but I can't do that with theism. I'm running into a lot of logical problems with theism and other views like materialism. I'm running into a lot of logical problems, whereas with idealism, I'm running into fewer. But on the other hand, like if you were to ask me, well, does that mean it must be true? I'm going to say no, not at all, because we have paraconsistent logic that applies to life and reality. There's different ways that you can actually look at the same question, and you can find answers that might not necessarily fit in a classically dichotomous sort of way, but it can make sense in another way. And reality is kind of messy like that. Reality is sort of will throw you for a loop. Like for example, here's a good example. Um, a lot of people like to talk about, especially with atheists. I hear a lot of atheists will say this. They'll say, like, "Well, I just appeal to Occam's razor," and they'll say, I look at the more parsimonious view and let that guide me." Well, did you know that everything we've ever discovered in the world has never been parsimonious at all? Like, if you look at, like, say, fluid dynamics, like the most parsimonious view to explain fluid dynamics would to say, well, the flow of gravity and the force, of the stream, all the molecules are going in one direction. And so that explains the fluid dynamics for why the stream is moving in that direction. Pretty parsimonious. We don't need to add anything. We don't need to try to infer anything from that. We don't need to try to, assume that there's more to the story than that. That's parsimonious. Therefore, that's probably the truth. But as it turns out, that's not what actually happens with fluid dynamics at all. Like, it's a lot more complicated than that. Actually, molecules move in different directions, not just one, and they just have the story all wrong. Like, yeah, it's parsimonious, but I'm afraid when we look at reality, reality doesn't give a shit about our guides and rules.
right. Yeah, I try only apply parsimony when it comes to problem solving, not necessarily when I'm exploring ideas.
Yeah,
Definitely
I
open to additional options,
Exactly.
avenues of exploration and all that.
Hey, Paul,
But I
how you
always,
doing, man?
Hello there.
How you
How
doing?
you doing?
oh,
Hi, Scott. Hi, is it David?
yes,
Hello, David. It's me.
hello, you as well.
Are you the David I've been talking to online, or are you a different David?
In the Facebook group,
Yeah.
yes, that's me.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Shagid.
Ah, awesome.
And
I
and
had,
Paul,
I had a
you're
question.
yeah, go right
Well,
ahead. Yep.
okay, cool. I was wanting to ask both of you what you thought about the concept of synchronicity.
Mm.
Mhm.
I'll be honest with you. You're getting my right brain triggered because I have experienced a lot of synchronicity in my life, but my left side of my brain tells me that's bullshit and that I'm
Uh-huh.
fooling myself and I'm only
Yeah.
counting the hits and I'm not counting the misses.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm kind of torn. It's only because my stupid left brain won't leave me alone on that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm here to tell you though, I've heard a lot of stories that don't really add up to my left brain's narrative.
Mm.
Like I'm sure if I go back on Google I can pull it up, synchronicities like, the Lincolns, like
Okay.
Abraham Lincoln
All right.
and Robert F. Kennedy. There's a synchronicity there. They both died on the same day, same hour, same year, just in a different
Mm.
century.
Mhm.
JFK was riding in a Lincoln.
Okay.
Abraham Lincoln was the name of the person that got assassinated. Both of them shot in the head.
Uh-huh.
There's all sorts of really weird scenarios around that situation, and there's a whole lot of other ones too. Whole
Mm.
lot of other examples in history. My
Because
left
my
brain doesn't
issue
know how
was
to
to touch
process that
back on
though.
the right brain, left brain thing that you mentioned once we've spoken about synchronicity, because I thought it was interesting that you brought that up.
Uh-huh.
Mm.
Yeah, it's as Bernardo Kastrup would say, that's what the disassociated mind and alter of the universe looks like from a third person perspective. You've got this dichotomous thinking mind,
Mm-hmm.
which is not in touch with reality. As he says that everything is just one. The dichotomies are human made sort of illusions.
Yeah.
But yet we can still talk about right and left brain. We're not really trying to be dichotomous. We're just trying to explain a way of talking about that situation.
I've actually coined a phrase for what the left brain does. I call it cognitive chopping.
Oh yes, that makes
That's a
sense.
good way to put it.
Cognitive chopping.
Yeah, because
Yep.
it loves to chop things up and to look at things in isolation. Um,
Yes.
and we can fool ourselves for a bit that thing that we're looking at in isolation isn't actually in reality connected with the rest of the world. We're looking at it in terms of like a limited model where it is a part in and of itself that exists apart from the whole. But like Humpty Dumpty never broke. That there never were any pieces. We just chopped it up that way in our perception, in our cognition,
Right.
to take a look at the thing. And what we're doing is we're looking at a model, and one of the limitations of that model is that we're looking at an isolated part, which isn't really an isolated part. We're just looking at something that everything is doing. Yeah,
Right.
something that
Right.
the wholeness is
Exactly.
doing. Yeah.
That's another thing. I think I posted up in the group about mereological nihilism.
Ooh.
It's a form of nihilism of where that's kind of leading. And basically what you're talking about when we talk about non-duality or the fallacy of dichotomy and things like that, we're kind of talking about the illusion of composites. Like when you say like if I was to describe a chair to you, we could talk about like the arm of the chair, the seat of the chair, the stands of the chair, the wool that the chair's overlaid with, the foam inside of it, all of these different things, the rubber, the wood, all of that, right? But if you were to take it on a scientific, if you were to take a materialistic view or a physicalist view, the physicalist would say, no, all there really is there is atoms and subatomic particles. They're just arranged a certain way. And what you're talking about when you talk about composites, you're talking about a way of talking about its function, or a way to talk about its physical description in your eyeballs or whatever. But you're not really talking about the reality. The reality is everything's physical. It's just atoms, subatomic part. There are no composites. And most philosophers agree with that, But then someone like Bernardo Kastrup comes along, or somebody like Philip Goff will come along, and what he's going to say is going to say, okay, are you sure you want to go there? Are you really sure you want to go there? And they'll say, of course, this defeats everything that the idealist and the whatever. That it's just going to kill all that shit. And then he'll say, yeah, but the problem is you assume that's you assume that's how idealists think about things. But what you don't understand is we actually agree with you. And in fact, if you talk about a mind, you'll ask the materialists, do you know what I'm experiencing right now? Do you know what I'm thinking right now? And they'll say, of course not. That's stupid. And then you'll say, exactly, we agree with you. As idealists will agree. And they'll say, well, then you have no point. So no, the point is this. Whereas the physical stuff is there are no composites, and everything's just atoms and subatomic particles, all just one thing. Wait a minute. The mind is two things. You can't know what I'm experiencing, and I can't experience what you're experiencing. So there is a composite. Minds are composites.
Whereas it's a multiplicity of perspectives.
Yeah, the perspectives in itself is like a relation. It's outside of the physical. It's not described in physical terms or materialistic terms. It's described in relations and disassociation. Yeah. So I'm disassociated from your mind and vice versa in all minds. Therefore, if all things that exist are not composites, because all things are physical and material, yet the mind is not a composite, or it is a composite and it's not, then that means the mind is not material. And that's not coming from him. He said, that's coming from you. You just agreed with all of those things. You agreed that you can't read my mind. I can't read yours. You agreed that all physical things are one property, just subatomic fields or whatever. So where does that leave you? With the mind being what? Material or immaterial by your own definition. So that's the other way to sort of look at it.
I got to say, I'm a little triggered right now.
Yeah.
I find certain words quite triggering, and immaterial is one of them. I don't believe you were using it in this way, but there are many who advocate for, say, physicalism or materialism or something, and they love to use the term immaterial.
Immaterial, yeah.
Yeah, because of the connotations, it becomes kind of like a weasel word.
Yep.
It's like they want to keep using immaterial to describe the place you're coming from if you're questioning materialism or physicalism.
Yep.
Immaterial this, immaterial that, and of course the equivocation there that they're implying that under the radar is like it's nothing worth considering.
Right, because it's like a defeater.
It's a defeater word. Has that meaning, doesn't it? It also has the meaning of So you could say non-material, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be more neutral. But if you use the word immaterial and you keep using it as like a rhetorical device, then you're really being a bit weaselly. So
Yeah, yeah,
I do get very triggered by certain words, and I know it's a very nerdy thing. Like the one that does me even more than immaterial, because you hear it so often, is problematic.
oh yeah, problematic.
Like, why would you butcher such a beautiful, functional word as problematical by cutting that tail off of the end there, right?
Right.
There's problematical, right? Okay, it's a bit old school. It can sound a bit pretentiousy, but here's the thing: what does it do in terms of the relationship to a problem?
Yeah, nothing at all, man.
Well, I think it does. I think that if you say something's problematic, then the problem is right in your face. But if you say something's problematical, there's a space there. There's a
Mm.
solvability indicated there, and I like the way that it aesthetically creates the ickle of it. It makes the problem smaller because you're rhyming it with ickle. Whereas the other way, you're rhyming it with ick. You're making something sick. You're putting a disease and sort of barfing into the discourse with all this potential drama of that's problematic.
Yeah.
Problematic. There's a real sense of like there's not a drive towards a solution there. There's a drive towards attention and drama.
Well, what do you
Whereas,
think about the word consciousness?
Well, hold on a second. No, the way
okay,
I've used it, the way I've used the word is basically that there's a problem there, and that warrants additional exploration. Not that hey, there's a problem, let's just shut it down.
Mm.
So just to add clarification, because I know that's where that came from recently.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, it's a me thing. Getting triggered by these words. It's
Mm-hmm.
nothing necessarily on the people that use them. Like I say, the way Scott used the word immaterial there, he wasn't using it in a Weasley way, but as soon as he used that word, I was like, I've got to get this off my chest. I've got
Yeah,
to say
yeah,
to you guys how I feel about this word. And then that
yeah.
brought around talking about problematical. And I'm sure that you weren't using problematic in a particularly drama-inducing way or an intention-inducing way. The way you used it in the conversation, where it brought that up for me earlier. Maybe that's like a synchronicity thing. I did have another question, if you guys are
Yeah.
interested.
Mm-hmm.
It comes from like the synchronicity line in a way. So I've had a couple of recent chats about an ontology that, like, for the most part, never comes up in the forums. Like, you see a lot of idealists in there these days. You see quite a few materialists,
Mm-hmm.
or at least physicalists. The more sophisticated subset of materialism that doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
quite so many mistakes. But I've actually come across neutral monism like 2 or 3 times in the
Yes,
last few
yes,
days.
yes. Yeah, yeah,
So, like,
yeah.
this idea, one of the neutral monads is information itself, just that the primitive isn't mind or material, or a combination of the two in some way. It's actually just data.
But isn't that just the same as saying Platonic form?
I don't think so,
Oh.
because I see it more as like just the raw data, and it only becomes
Yeah.
information when it's recognized.
But when people say raw data, they're talking about some sort of is it sort of like a law or a um is it in that same category? I don't think it's a law, but it's got to be a
Uh,
category of what does that mean, raw data?
Mm,
it's just
mm.
just like the underlying fabric of the universe. I mean, if you want to refer to it as a fabric,
That's
uh,
what Platonic forms are. They're underlying
but it's
structures
not
in the
but it's
universe.
not formed though. It's not like a form or a structure. It's just a thing like string theory, I guess.
Ah,
Is
okay.
is relatable there, or
Well,
relative rather.
here would be my next question on that topic. It's to do with the nature of data itself. What do you guys think about the idea that data requires discrepancy? It needs
I think it's
discrimination.
required to become information.
Oh, so that's where you bridge the two.
The informative part of it.
Yeah, without giving it much thought. I'll go with that for now.
So with the data, the raw data, would you say that these are like abstract, unchanging concepts or ideals?
No.
No. What would they be like? What? Because I'm trying to wrap my head around it right now.
Yeah, I've been working on a way to describe it. The best I can do is the visual references that I provided on Facebook for those GIFs, just like
Okay.
the field of potentiality, which I guess would be the quantum. And so it all would rise from that. And then through gravity, it gets condensed into forms or substrates.
I've been looking at it in
But
terms of the smallest possible piece of the smallest possible datum, being just like a basic binary bit.
So is it a neutral?
It's a something that's on or off, essentially. Or I
I think
guess
it's,
in reality now we're looking at something that's on, off, or both on and off, and neither at the same time. So it's on, off, or weird.
yes.
So
Would it be in suit like in quantum field theory, like you have the underlying reality is a quantum field, which is like a superposition of all states that can ever exist. But once it interacts with like gravity or it interacts with another particle that's already actuated, for example, then it takes a form, then it actuates into, and then every form is totally connected to the field. Like there's no disconnection. So that's where the monism comes in. But it's sort of like it sounds kind of like what you're talking about, but I'm just not sure what you mean. Like, is it sort of like a field of like a neutral field that is just kind of just it can be either or. The data can be this kind of information or that kind of information. It just depends on the relation.
I think what you're exploring right now is exactly the problem that I've been having with it, which is that if you want to think about something in terms of pure data, which is not in relation to any material or any mentation or any other ontological substance, then for me the problem that comes in with that is what is being discriminated from what. Where is what is the fundamental difference between something being a 0 or a 1 if it's not a 0 of something or a 1 of something? See,
Yeah,
if
who
there's
is it
nothing,
for? Who is this information for?
yeah,
Like
if there's nothing to
it
be
can't be for
discriminated from
itself.
something else, a datum requires a difference that makes a difference. You see, and if there's no medium for the datum, then that difference isn't really there.
Yeah.
Every instance we can think of data is like, something's written in a book, so the book's the medium. Something's encoded on a hard drive or on a disk, and that's the medium. Something that's held in memory or in current consideration, then the mind or the memory is the medium. Even when we consider raw data, we lend it a medium, because while it's being considered, our consideration is what houses that data. So, or our imagination, if you will. So there is something there that can be either on or off, or up or down, or left or right, or both and
Reminds
neither
me
at
of
the same time.
Stephen Hawking says, what is the what is the breath that breathes fire into the equations?
Mm.
Like,
I think
or if data is
Theology
the
was a poet
medium.
as well.
Well, I think the subconscious is the medium, and then from there
Yep.
it becomes the true or false value.
See,
Would that be the collective unconscious,
But the subconscious,
collective subconscious?
I don't know if it's collective or not. That I haven't figured that much out yet.
Okay. The subconscious of whom?
I don't think it's a
Oh,
it's just the way it comes across to me is a superset of a conscious and unconscious state, which would be the subconscious. So whatever that is, who knows? Like, is it just a dream? Some people would argue so.
yeah,
yeah. That jives with a lot of my thinking. Actually, the idea of a cosmic dreamer dreaming us all and the world into existence.
yeah. That's kind of how I feel about it too. Like there's a mechanics to the dream,
Mhm.
and it's a consistent sort of pattern. But a lot of people, um, a lot of skeptics of that view will ask, well, why does it work in the way that when if I jump in front of the train, I get run over and I die? There's real consequences to all of these things. So I mean, what explains that? And why
Well,
why
that's where
how could idealism be true if that also is true? Like, how is it true that have this experience that goes totally against what your metaphysical view is? And my only thing is like, who cares? Because the dreamer can dream whatever he dreams. That's that has no more. You
Are
know,
you
um,
saying, are you saying the problem is that life's a bit too sensible?
yeah, like you're saying, makes so much sense. It follows a logical path, trajectory, and
Mm.
yet you're offering this view that goes totally against all of that. Like it doesn't
Mm.
really, it's like the principle of verification comes in. It's like,
Yeah.
you know,
There's an awful lot of structure and regularity for a dream. Especially compared to the dreams that we dream.
well,
There's a lot more oddness in.
my question is, why should any reality have more privilege over any other one? Like, why would
Mm.
me eating my dinner at the dinner table, or a person being abducted by a UFO, or a person flying in the sky with angel wings or whatever? Why should any of those things have any more, importance than any of the other ones? Like, that's just because we live in this reality.
Mm.
So
to go,
it's hard. It's like these are the kind of observers we are, and so we're
Mm.
sort of projecting our experience onto how we think that metaphysics should work. And
Mm.
it's like that's not necessarily true. It's like you can see that even in your dreams. You
Mm.
don't dream things that are necessarily always rational at every point according to what you consider rational.
Would
um
you consider this kind of similar to the what is it? Sagan's flatland analogy?
yeah, yeah, the two-dimensional world where they can't really see the three-dimensional, you know world that they come from, so they can't imagine it. And it would be hard for someone off, flatland, to actually explain. It's like a fish out of water.
Mm.
uh, to go back to verification real quick.
Yeah,
I think the empirical verification I could provide is basically black holes.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, you were mentioning that before.
yeah, because
Just
if you think about it, they're sort of a conscious unconscious thing because we can see that they exist, but we can't perceive how they exist because light doesn't light is trapped within. Well, not really
yeah,
trapped, but it gets
Mm.
broken down to its fundamentals.
Mm. This is pretty heavy.
So it's really
yeah,
just trying to figure out a way to unify the philosophical aspect to the empirical aspect. That's what I've been working on for like 6 months now.
Like, what we do know about black holes, we can factor in, like, we know that there's an information paradox there where,
I'm still
you
working on
know,
that too.
yeah, like, but my solution to that, I kind of agree with a lot of other people on this, that you know, the black hole is basically a hologram. So the inside of a black hole is, if you look at the surface area of a black hole, that's really what's inside of the black hole, right? So the information doesn't really disappear. It's right there on the surface area of the black hole. They call it the event horizon. And so the
Right.
black hole is kind of like a mirror. And so it's just mirroring, into a hologram. And so if you take that same logic, and and it shouldn't just apply to black holes. They say it applies to the entire universe. The entire universe is like that it's just a hologram. So you and I, we're not really, we're just a chip off the old block. We're not the real data or information
Yeah.
or
We're just
whatever.
substrates, really.
Yeah. A reflection of some
Avatar.
deeper avatars.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
That's I kind of think of black holes as like dark stars. Instead of emitting light and all that, they emit dark energy.
Mm-hmm.
Are there white
So
holes as well, or did I imagine that?
No,
I think
you're
white
right.
holes are just regular stars, but just at a
Oh,
grander scale.
so what is it?
But as well,
Well, in astrophysics, they're called time reversed black holes.
Ooh,
They're like they're unlike black holes, which suck matter in. White holes are, theoretically, they expel the matter out. Matter and energy gets expelled outward rather than inward.
yeah. So that's how I was describing like a dark universe compared to a bright universe. Dark universes they originate from black holes, whereas bright universes originate from white holes.
White
And
holes.
I'm thinking like that. And I think that's where we would get the sense of interconnectivity
Yes,
from
because
idealism is
right.
from bright universes, and then the separation is in the substrates of the dark universe, which is
Hmm.
what we exist in.
Yeah, which you could, maybe another word for it could be called the Planck scale. Because
Yeah,
beyond the Planck scale, you can't really measure anything. And this has been like a nail in the coffin to materialism. Like the old fashioned materialism would say that, matter is fundamental. It's everything's made of matter. But then when we
yeah,
started inventing these super, resolutions from these microscopes, we're able to see just how far. We can only go to 33, not minus 33 meters. That's as far as we can go, minus 33 centimeters.
I
And
know.
beyond that,
I still
you
have.
you would literally create a black hole, because you'd have to shine so much energy, and the gravity included would just create a black hole.
Yeah.
So what you're saying
That's
actually makes a lot of sense. I think
that's
you're on
that's
to
what
something.
that's
I
what I
think,
think is that the subconscious is just a mini little black hole, just a little dot
yeah,
in
gotcha.
there.
Now I understand what you're saying. Because I really didn't
Yeah, I'd like to.
understand it first. I was like, well, I don't understand black holes enough to understand maybe what he's talking about. But now that you
Well,
mention it,
to be fair, I haven't really explained it cohesively. It's been
right? But I
bits
mean,
and
I
pieces
get the
using
overall
AI.
idea. Hmm.
So what
Yeah,
you
but
say, David, sort of puts me in mind of the Taoist symbol.
Yes, I
hmm
was going to refer to that.
Oh, you was.
Yeah.
Oh,
So when
so
you look at the yin yang, it's one side is primarily this, and the other side is primarily that, but they both contain each other. So I think that's the case with the the distinction between materialism and idealism is that
Mm,
based on the cyclical nature of universe creation, whether it becomes dark or bright, it still contains one or the other. So
Mm,
there is no, separation there. It's just that there's greater emphasis on one or the other based on that cycle.
mm.
mm,
I mean, that
yeah.
makes a lot of sense. That's another way I could see that as a way of people actually arguing for idealism in a way, like a more naturalistic sort of idealism, you know.
Mm. I don't know whether I should mention this or not, but I could get very picky about the language. I mean, I really appreciate what you're onto, David. But I think that this fusion that you have between some of the concepts of idealism and some of the concepts of materialism is fascinating. But for me, part of the definitions of those things does make them ultimately incompatible. So I'm not exactly sure what particular linguistic revision to suggest to avoid going into the territory where it looks like you're leaning into a contradiction. But at the end of the day, if you've got a position that says the substrate is mental and a position that says the substrate is non-mental,
Right.
then they can't both be true at the same time.
So
At
like
least
is the matter in consciousness, or is the consciousness in the matter?
Mm, mm. And so I
I,
think
I would say it alternates.
the fusion that you're aiming for.
Mm,
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
hmm.
Yeah, so it never. I don't think it ever really comes down to it's just strictly this or that. It's just that
Hmm.
there's greater emphasis placed on this particular setup as opposed to that one.
Oh,
Hmm. Are you using the this and the that in kind of like how a Hindu would point towards what is this and what is that, because they're very specific about those words, or are you just, is it just a coincidence that you happen to be using those terms?
Just for the sake of convenience, I guess, because I lack a formal background and therefore don't have an expanded vocabulary. Admittedly,
but I wonder
like the
too. A question I have is, how do we know which um, universe we live in? How do we know we're in the dark or the light? Because the experience that I'm having now is mental.
Mm,
Because when I look, everything like matter, physicality, like if you ask me what is material, what is matter, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I know how it appears to me, but that's a conscious experience, and that's so I'm not really answering the question. I'm talking about what I experience, and that's not really what they'd be asking me. They're asking me, no, what is the material? What is the
mm,
matter? And I don't know, because the only thing I know is an experience. So that makes me wonder, am I in the light universe where it's consciousness, or am I in the dark universe experiencing material, and that counts as the dark universe? And I'm not sure how, though. That's the only thing.
but I would say that we're definitely in the dark universe because look at the night sky. Without light, it's default blackness, nothingness.
Mm, okay.
Whereas a bright universe, we would be able to see more, but because we cannot, we have to develop technology that's able to
So
see for us.
is the dark universe a mental universe or a physical universe or a
Physical.
material? Physical.
I would
What
say,
is
I would
what
say it
is
leans more towards the material side.
and then I have to ask you the same thing the person would ask me. What is material? What does that mean? What is it?
Just condensates and substrates. that are produced from the quantum. And that's why I would refer to semi-Dirac fermions, because they can be either, depending on their range of motion.
I
So I
see.
think
So
If it goes in
they're
one direction, it contains mass. If it goes in the other direction, it's massless. And I think that's
gonna
the
need to ask
ultimate,
for a glossary at this point.
determinant factor. What's that?
I'm going to need to ask for a glossary at this point. There are several terms that have just
I've been trying to get to that.
made my eyes roll all the way around the room.
I think he's talking about certain particles based on, like, depending on how they interact, they're either going to be, you know, actuated into some sort of form, or they're going to be formless.
Yeah,
So
they're quasi-particles.
when you say condensate, is that to do with the process of this neutral monad manifesting as either consciousness or as material? Is that the condensation process that you're talking about?
That would be like, the condensate would be the formation of gases and whatnot. So it would be mostly in reference to that.
But when we observe all these things that you're talking about, like these fermions and things that, you know, do what they do, you know,
Have you
either
observed the fermion? I'm not sure I ever have. What is a fermion? I don't really know
It's
what that is.
quasi-particle. I'll link it in the group because I don't have it offhand right here.
yeah, they have like a half spin of this and a half spin of that. They obey some sort of Pauli exclusion principle or something. But, you know, basically it's kind of like he said, they tend to, you know, be a sort of subatomic particle that, you know, follows like this mathematical statistical sort of thingy. So it's all statistical, but those statistics are done using consciousness. They're abstractions. You know, they're observed as mathematical abstractions. So that's why I'm kind of confused. Like, if the dark universe is physical, then it would be easy to define what physical is. Like, it would be, I mean, outside of a conscious experience of it. Because conscious experience means we're bringing consciousness into this dark universe somehow. And I'm not sure if it's all, you know, is all of it mental? Like, how would we know? How would we know? Like, it seems like we're abstracting based on an abstraction. It's like we're abstracting this category and then we're making further
Life
abstract.
is mental, Scott.
Huh?
Life is mental. Everybody knows that. Everybody that lives life knows that life is mental.
Right. So I'm trying to figure out how to, you know, tie that together, because it sounds like a cool idea. I just want to know how we can actually, you know.
Well, I just want to say real quick that fermions have been observed. They're not necessarily abstracts. I shared that information.
Yeah, you did, and I know
a month ago.
they've been observed. Of course, that's what I'm saying.
Mirages have been observed. Dreams have been observed. Observation of something doesn't necessarily make it real.
Yeah, the observations can be like direct or indirect, like black holes, for example. We have indirect, or dark matter, for example. We have indirect
Scott, I'm dying to have
observation.
a run at that question that you both had a go at, which is what matter is. So would you mind asking me that one?
Well, he said that, I think he said it's the what was that again? The subset of something?
Yeah, substrates.
Substrate.
And condensates, basically.
Because I can give you my version. What I mean is what I think matter is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's an element of a model. The atomic model that, you know, when we do our scientific modeling, the models aren't meant to necessarily be taken completely literally and as metaphysical ontological claims. They are our creations that
Description.
we dare to test against reality.
Yes.
Okay, so that we generate these models, and we say, maybe, how would Castro put it? He sort of does it like, whatever scientific theory you like, you can contextualize by saying nature behaves as though, and then insert your scientific theory here, so that it's metaphysically uncommitted. So the model, the material model, the atomic model, and the particle models and such. I mean, you can take two different approaches to it. You can take a literalist approach and say that they're discoveries and that we're literally talking about what the world is made of, or you can take a non-literalist approach and you say, well, no, all models are false, some models are useful, and we just test and refine those models so that we can better manipulate the contents of consciousness for our benefit, like in terms of technology and such. So it's not whether the model is true as such in an ontological fashion. It's simply just, is it useful?
Yes, and is it valid? Like,
Mm.
like the verifiability criterion, like the verification principle, argues that, a statement is only meaningful if it's empirically verifiable or a tautology, right? But the thing that I would ask is the verifiable principle, are you able to also empirically
Is that
verify that?
verifiable? Yeah. Yeah.
It's and this is
Yeah,
where we get to that problem. It's like, yeah, our models
self-referential
our
stuff
models are just, yeah,
it plays havoc with logic when you use self-referential stuff, like the Russell's paradox, where like
yeah,
if you put a certain set within itself,
right.
then you get all these contradictions.
Well, see, this is
Um,
why physics people hate talking to philosophers. They can't stand each other because
yeah.
they're not, it's like what's his name? Lawrence Krauss said, philosophy is useless, which is a philosophical claim. It's like,
Yeah, yeah. I, I butt
Uh,
heads with a lot of diehard science fans who are constantly telling me science is better than philosophy. My answer
yeah,
to which is that science and philosophy is better than science.
yeah, yeah,
So it's
yeah.
literally like, it's meant as it, if you use philosophy as a companion to science, and so that there's an informative relationship between the two, so that your science informs your philosophy and your philosophy informs your science, then you've got a better standing and a better worldview than if you simply just dump philosophy down the river and you go, no,
right.
I just want to deal with science. The whole shut up and calculate thing. You're not gonna get very far if you absolutely have to annihilate philosophy from your thinking. But if a philosopher doesn't take science seriously, then they're not going to get very far either. So ultimately, they're dance partners.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and then
I
it
agree.
gets back to actually theism in a way because
Mhm.
you remember the church and science. It was
Ah,
like called natural
no, you
philosophy.
don't.
It's like
Mhm.
Mm.
science wasn't supposed to do philosophy. It's like, we don't want you doing it. And then scientists finally got to the point where they're like, yeah, well, philosophy is kind of useless. Look how much progress we're making um, through this methodology of science, the project of science. And so they tended to look down on philosophy like it's just a lot of wispy, you know, woo
Woo and all
woo and
that.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, but now
Yeah.
we're kind of coming full circle to where it's like, wait a minute, we can easily now see the fallacy in that thinking,
Yeah.
and we
How are
can
we going
also
to
see,
decide
yeah,
how
the
to apply
practicality.
our
Yeah,
science? How are we going to just ask questions about how to apply our science if we don't use philosophy, if we don't use ethics? All right.
Mm-hmm.
People love to talk about the ill purposes to which religion has been put while they're championing science, and science is so pure and everything, but they seem to ignore at the same time, well, science and technology has been put to a mixed bag of purposes, just the same as religion has.
Yes.
Science and technology has given us incredible surveillance technology, incredible
Hydrogen bomb.
Weapons.
incredible ability to manipulate and to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
It's to blame science and technology, or to blame religion, I think are very convenient scapegoats to avoid the fact that the problematical stuff is us.
Yeah.
It's human beings and the mixed bag of ill intentions and good ones that we are. They talk about the monsters and angels inside us all. That's not meant literally, but it's a good metaphor for the fact that human beings are a very mixed bag of good intentions and ill. And so better people would have made better religions and put their religions to better purposes, and better people would have made better purposes for their science and technology as well. But look, we've done what we've done with our stuff because we are what we are, which isn't perfect, nor is it completely terrible. We've got these motivations and these fears and all of this
Yeah.
stuff, but it's uncomfortable to admit all of that. And so you've got a whole bunch of people like, say, the Amish, who are very anti science and technology, and you've got an even bigger bunch of people who have got real strong opinions against anything religio spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what they point towards this thing and say, oh, the evil in the world is all religion. Well, what's religion apart from an umbrella term that we use for a subset of human activity and thought? It's all just
I,
us.
I
That's
think a
all. That's
good
all it is.
argument could be made that a lot of the evil comes from duality,
Oh,
from dualistic thinking. Like if you're
Mhm.
more
absolutely.
of a non-dichotomist, you're more of like a non-dual sort of person,
Mm,
then you're going to see nature, you're going to see your fellow man, you're going to see everything as one thing, and you wouldn't want to harm yourself.
yeah.
And so if you actually took that seriously, then you could see a big change happen. And that's part of the reason that I endorse non-dual type of teachings and things like that, because I see the moral value in it.
Mm, hmm Yeah.
It's about
Somebody asked
basically
me.
looking at the whole picture. Sorry,
Yep.
Paul.
Yep.
I often find that I'm asked when it comes to non-dual stuff. People, the first thing they do is they point to what they think are incoherences, but that's only because
Hmm.
they're looking at it through the lens of materialism, and they're still attached to a
Mhm.
materialistic view. And obviously, if you're trying out a new pair of glasses over the ones that you're already wearing, then things aren't going to come into very good focus. But another place that where people eventually go to with it is they say, okay, like, it's got all of these theoretical virtues and it does dissolve some of our intractable problems, but what's it for? What's the use? What's the pragmatic consequence of it? And I just think the answer to that is like, what isn't affected? When you talk about a difference between our relationship with ourself, our relationship
Right.
with other, and our relationship with the world at large, if all of that changes, then what isn't impacted by it? If a little, like you say, a little gentle imperative towards a tiny bit of self-love with a non-dual philosophy, it means that the whole golden rule thing doesn't have to be taught with like a finger wagging, this is what you ought to do. it
Right.
just it just
Right.
falls out naturally. It's just like, I treat loving my neighbor as myself. Well, they are myself. And so
Yeah. You don't have
it's
to wag your
self-love.
finger
And
to say you should eat when you're hungry.
and the world at large, why would I mistreat and misuse the world at large when that is my body?
Right.
When I'm not the little sense me anymore, when the truth is non-dual, and I am an aspect of the whole of oneness. I'm the, what is it, the ocean in the drop, right?
Hmm.
Then what's that going to do to environmentalism? What's that going to do to our attitude? If everybody like overnight had a non-dual epiphany, okay, they wake up tomorrow morning where they've been going through all of this dualistic vibe, and you know they've been concerned about whether the neighbors have got more, and treatment of these people, that they're being treated better than I am, and all of those concerns that were much more limited. They suddenly feel that, well, actually, like, altruism is going to come to the fore, environmentalism is going to come to the fore, and without ever having to wag a finger and tell anybody off. It's just a natural consequence of a little bit of self-love. That's all that's needed. Like, if there's self-love there, and like, as opposed to like sadomasochism or something, or nihilism, then a non-dual philosophy impacts the relationship to self, the relationship to other, and the relationship to world. So these guys that are asking about pragmatic consequences, I'm like, what isn't impacted by that? If it's going to change
Right.
all of those attitudes and all of the ways that we relate to everything else, and when you look at well-being, is well-being important to us? I think it is, and it probably should be. So that means that we're looking at the balance between joy and suffering.
Right.
So how much unnecessary suffering is caused by identity and dualistic thinking?
Right. Right. Exactly. And people, it would really help people, but the problem is, and I've had this debate with Dave, the pandeist, Dave,
All right.
and we had that debate a few weeks ago, and I was trying to really make that same point, but he was saying no, reality is very dualistic,
Mm.
and you see that every day. Like, you
Yeah.
negotiate with that every day, and what would be the point in taking care of your kids, doing good things for others? Where is the meaning if there's no duality? If it's just one thing, then all of the meaning and all of the purpose goes out the window eventually, ultimately.
Yeah.
And so what I was telling him was that that's really a misunderstanding of non-duality,
Yeah.
because non-duality is just that. It's not dichotomous thinking. You're thinking in dichotomies. We're not thinking in dichotomies like that. We're saying that we embrace the duality.
Right.
Yeah, the
It's the
duality is
observance
very,
of the
yeah,
dichotomy.
right, right.
Here's the distinction that I think will bring some clarity to that.
Hmm.
So what Dave Apendeist is talking about there, I think, is apparent duality. So
Yeah.
duality within what some people call the construct, or the matrix, or the Maya,
Hmm. Yep.
within the projection, within the contents of the dreamscape, or um, a lot of these are kind of ethereal sounding terms. I'm trying to look for something that sounds a bit more neutral.
Yeah.
But it's apparent. The duality is apparent. It's a part of
So
experience.
apparent. Yeah. That's
Yes.
That doesn't mean it's ontological.
right. It doesn't make sense to be ontologically coherent. It.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe on one particular view of logic. If you, like I said, everything that when you talk about this stuff analytically, we're talking about like a classically logical framework, but we're also looking at the emotional side too, because like you said, it's all about unity, and you know really care for each other as you'd want to care for yourself. So it's practical. There's utility, and it's just like materialism. We can talk shit about materialism and the dualism all day long, but actually that shit's got us to where we can actually do this podcast. It's like the technology, everything that we love and desire comes out of that
Oh, I have to
methodology.
stop you there, Scott.
Still comes from
I think I think you're wandering into stolen valor territory there.
Yeah,
Still comes from
Right.
ideas, though.
comes from right.
Yeah.
That circles back around. Is what I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
you know you can say
don't
all
think-
that. It's apparent, but if you keep going with the logic, you realize that it all comes from the same source.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I argue for the interconnectivity between the two.
Yeah.
Not that it's just one or the other. It's
Right.
both.
Exactly.
I'd like to see what you guys think about this idea, because I think that there are many materialism advocates who engage in what I would call stolen valor. So the reason I say that is that you were talking about scientific advancements,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say that that's due to scientific modeling, not due to materialism.
Right.
So a methodological naturalism that has led to the development of technology doesn't have to make any metaphysical commitments to any kind of materialism. The idea that it does would be very, very convenient for the materialist side of the philosophical debate, because essentially they'd have all science and technology on their side. And then what does idealism have on its side? It's like, well, we don't have the hard problem of consciousness anymore because we said consciousness was primitive,
Mm-hmm.
and that's pretty much it. But in reality, the methodological naturalism doesn't commit to either side of that debate. So
Have you ever spent time watching debates between materialists and idealists?
a little bit. I was just going to reference somebody who's one of your friends
Uh-huh.
who has quite a few of those debates. I think he had a conversation with Bernardo Kastrup online.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
name
Tom
is
Jump.
right now.
Tom Jump.
That's the guy, Tom Jump. Yeah, T Jump.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he engages a lot, I think, in this stolen valor.
Oh
So,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
He even though, I love him to death, man, but dude, he goes so far. Like I understand, but see, the thing about T Jump y'all don't understand is, maybe I shouldn't say this, but he's in it for the subs. He's trying to make money with this shit. So he's got to take that position. His whole thing is, he'll even tell you straight up on his channel, I don't want to destroy Christianity, because this is how I make my money by debating you people. I want you to stay around as long as you can, So he's not really serious like that.
Yeah, the self-interest is rather obvious.
Yeah, he's like, I understand it's bullshit. It's just that I've got to,
So he's engaging in brand protection.
Yeah. I mean, they all do it. Darth Dawkins. You got to think,
Yep.
this
The
dude
whole
is an
atheist
actor.
dichotomy.
Yeah, they're playing a role. They're trolls, man. They're internet trolls. and,
Well, some of them are very good at it.
and they're really good at it. And he's
Yeah.
very well versed in it. Like, he's really well versed. And a lot of the stuff he does actually believe. He's really strong in it. But some of the things I think he knows philosophically, he goes a little too far.
Right. Yeah.
He
I mean, when he
stretches a lot.
says materialism has a methodology, and idealism doesn't have a comparative methodology, and until it does, you can't really compare the two.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what do you mean materialism has a methodology? Why are you stealing an ontology from a methodology?
Yeah, materialism has no methodology.
It pretends.
But
to be
materialism is a philosophy. It's a metaphysic.
Let's just look at this. How empirically grounded is materialism? The idea that something exists independently of mind, right?
Yeah.
How are you going to provide empirical verification for that?
I mean, you can't. I mean, that's the whole.
You can't. It's
That's the
impossible.
whole argument. You have to really, you have to assume that the thing you're describing is the thing itself.
Mm.
That's the problem with that kind of. I mean, logically speaking, like, I'm not even saying, materialism. I don't even know what materialism is to say it can't be true. I mean, material, maybe what they mean by material is exactly what idealists mean by material. They just don't know it. It's just that the language is different. It's, that's possible, because a lot of people I talk to say, well, you're sort of misframing me as a materialist. I don't really believe that. Just because I'm a materialist doesn't mean I'm an epiphenomenalist.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, so what are you? And they're like, well, I'm more identity theory, or I'm more emergentism, or I'm a panpsychist, or
I'm
it's
not
like
sure
they'll
I can find a difference between emergentism and epiphenomenalism. Could you catch me up if there is a difference there?
well, yeah, like someone who doesn't believe in epiphenomenalism, you can still be an emergentist. You can be an emergentist and be an epiphenomenalist too. But the epiphenomenalism is like the steam off the train, the chimney, like the smoke out the chimney. It's like consciousness is like that. It's like the brain does shit, and then emerging out of that processing comes consciousness, then an experience of that processing. But
I think it's
that,
generated.
yeah, it's like it's generated. It generates this conscious theater, and but under that philosophy, they also say this also means logically that it can have no backwards causation. It can't cause anything on the physical. The physical imposes to create or generate that, but it doesn't have any causative effect on the physical. But
Really?
the evidence now shows that brain plasticity, you can actually physically damage your brain. You can physically control your body temperature through your thought, through your mentation, things like that.
Yeah.
And so they're saying that can't be true. Epiphenomenalism can't be true. So a lot of people are still like, well, I'm still a materialist. So I just think what happens is I'm going to be a dualist. It creates like a soul. It creates like this conscious thing that has causative effect on its brain too. Like it creates this entity, and this entity can have causal effect backwards onto the thing, but it wouldn't exist without the brain. It's always dependent on the brain existing. So it's like they have an interaction problem. That's the problem with dualism. The
That's
interaction
also
problem.
true. That's also true under analytic idealism of Bernardo Castro. The mind wouldn't exist without the brain, but not because the brain is the cause of the mind, because the brain is the image of the mind.
Right.
So,
Right.
and all of the correlations still work out, except perhaps the breakdown in correlations that happens during transcendent experience.
Well, the only thing that changes is the ground assumption. It gets reversed. It just says that it's therefore mentation or therefore matter, And they kind of have a point. I mean, one I think one of the best arguments for materialism that was made. I'm not saying I agree with it. I understand the problems with it overall, but I'm just saying one of the clever little points I heard in a debate recently, a materialist said, "Yeah, well, within your idealistic worldview, there's an assumption that everything must come from some fundamental substrate to begin with." He says, so who we are as conscious beings has nothing to do with the substrate that reality comes from. There's no connection to it at all. He said that basically it's like a CD. You could take a CD and you could hear music in different CD players. It's like it's not the CD was created by software, but it had nothing. It had no connection to the wires and circuits and transistors in the computer itself. It had no relation to that. It only had relation to the code. That's all it needs is the code. It doesn't need the transistors and the things like that. But
So this is an argument from
foundationalists will say, but you can't have the code without the transistors and the power and electricity. So it just depends on how far you want to go back. So that was a good argument. The guy was saying that, maybe consciousness just comes from the brain. It has nothing to do with the quantum field or some field of consciousness or even any kind of substrate. Like
At
it
least
just
she's
comes from
using
the
a
brain.
maybe. At
Hmm?
least she's using a maybe. I come across so many dogmatists
Yeah.
out in the wild
Oh yeah.
who would just say, no, no, consciousness is what brains do, and that's that. It's scientifically established, and almost all the time, if I ask them for their reasons for that, then those reasons will fail on one of three counts. The first one is after this, therefore because of this. The second
Hmm.
is correlation derives causation.
Hmm.
And the third is the question begging argument. And the
Yeah.
question begging is so subtle. It really is. The premise, most people don't even know that it's a speculative metaphysical assumption.
Yeah.
They think it's a given that the fundamental nature of the world around us and the objects that we identify is that they are physical in nature. So they will say that like a scalpel or a pill or a falling piano are all physical objects, and so is the brain. And so when there's interaction between that pill or that scalpel or that falling piano and the brain, and that leads to a change in the mind, then that demonstrates, well, we see a physical
Yeah.
phenomenon.
Well,
That's a
they'll
mental
ask
phenomenon.
you, how do you explain how damaging the brain can change the experience? How do you explain that? And it's like you're begging the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Because under idealism, the mind brain system is impacted at the same time because they're the same thing. One is just the image of the other. So you've got the
Hmm.
process, the mental, and the image of it, the physical brain. And so when something interacts within the field of mentation, two lots of mentation interact with one another, there's impingement, there's interaction, then we will see interaction between object and brain. But what will happen under idealism is that the essence of those objects, the mentation behind them, is what's
Well, I
doing
want to
the
challenge you. I want to take the materialist view
okay.
and actually challenge the idealist view, because we don't really have, unless David wants to challenge it. I mean, I can challenge you on it. Maybe if I can think up some questions, because it's been a while. Most of them will say things like, well, you know, how do you explain the fact that you can't remember before you were born? I've heard that one. How would you answer that?
I can't remember last Thursday, mate.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I have a working memory deficit.
Yeah.
I can't remember what I was supposed to be working on 10 minutes ago half of the time. You know,
Right.
there are so many distractions. I remember before you were born. I mean, aren't there supposed to be instances where people do things like past life regressions?
Right.
Now, I don't know how scientific they are, how academically studied they are.
So
But I don't
here's
think
a
it's a
question
given
they'll
that
ask
no
you.
one remembers.
What role does the brain play then? What role does the brain play in idealism?
It's an image. It's what mentation looks like from an outside perspective.
Oh, very good.
And I
I
say
came up with
outside.
a simple analogy for it
Yeah.
between the dichotomy of materialism and idealism.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Materialism is basically the box attempting to describe itself, whereas idealism is the space within the box attempting to describe itself.
Mm.
What do you think of that?
uh
I like it.
yeah, it makes it, I can see that as an accurate kind of description. Yeah. Because everything's still inside the box.
Yeah, the brain in the jar,
Hmm.
if you
Yeah.
will.
And it's like I always say, it's still reality though. It's
Yep.
perceptual reality. And you know, it's kind of like in our reality, it's sort of like a mirror too.
Hmm.
In the same way,
Yeah.
what we're around most of the time experiencing is going to sort of program us in our thinking, and then we project that sort of thinking onto the world, and it becomes who we identify with. And this is where all that the brain really likes to trick us, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you recall the meme I shared where it's one image and then it's the same image but reversed?
Yes, yeah. Mhm.
That's pretty much how I see it.
Yeah.
So there
Just
is
in
there is an
simple
olive
terms.
branch that I like to offer to the materialist, which is pragmatic materialism, which is to say that, you know, the maps are very, very useful, not just
Mhm.
scientifically speaking, but in terms of just living your life and identifying things and saying, like, you know, okay, I'm consciousness experiencing itself, but also I'm a bloke in his slippers about to go down the shop to get some tea bags. And
Mhm.
it's just a sensible, practical, everyday way of living, where you do just make a general everyday assumption that we are physical beings in a physical world, and
Yeah.
that's fine, especially if you marry that up with a humble metaphysical agnosticism. So if you say, you know, I live this way by this map. I'm not saying that this is the way that the world is, and that I'm not having any philosophical entertaining any other philosophical theories, but I just have a pragmatic sense that, like, I can go about my day-to-day business without necessarily bothering myself with all of these deeper questions of what's behind it all. I can just operate under pragmatic materialistic assumptions.
Like a
So that's the
functionalist. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the olive branch I'll offer. I'll say, look, not everybody has to contemplate this stuff all the time. You don't necessarily have to be a psychonaut or an analytical philosopher. Um, like,
It may not even be it may not even be good to do that anyways in some
mm,
ways,
mhm,
because you know, if you think about it, suppose this scenario is right. I'm not saying it is, but suppose that we fractal off from this greater
I'm
mind
online in a group.
in order
Otherwise
to
I would
be
chat.
in order to play this role, you know, as who we are, you know, in the
mhm,
greater mind, this character called Paul, right?
yeah,
Well, it's kind of like if you ever put on those VR headsets and you go to play the game, and maybe your character is Zelda, right?
mhm, mhm,
Well, you're not going to go in there and not be Zelda. That kind of defeats the whole point of the VR game. The whole point
mm,
is you want to experience it, what it's like to be Zelda in that game,
yeah,
in that context. So you don't want to take yourself out of that context. You want to do Zelda, you know. Maybe
mhm,
that's why the greater mind fractals off the way it does. Um,
mm,
and so, you know, maybe this is why it's so intuitive to be a materialist, really.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that triggered another thought for me. You explaining it that way, which is a, a perspective that I gave when asked about heaven and about the problem of suffering.
Yeah,
So how I framed it was that in order for heaven to be heavenly, what it what it what it needs is a way for its occupants to escape from the cringing perfection of it all.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
because like it's like the perfection paradox, the Mona Lisa smile thing. Like there's a there has to be some release from that,
Well,
otherwise it wouldn't be heavenly. So what they did is they made a rec room, and you can go to this rec room in heaven, and you can escape
hmm,
from the cringing perfection of it all, and that's about where we came in.
yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. I used to interview near-death experiencers for IONS. With the IONS, they're like the association of near-death experiences and stuff like that. And so you'd have all these speakers and people come in, you know, giving their experience, talking about what they've experienced. And you know, I would like to go too. I like to listen to these people get up and talk and present, you know, their story And then I would talk to them and just kind of write down some of the stuff I learned and interview them, and they used to love to talk about it. And one thing that I used to really focus on were the commonalities of the experiences,
Mm,
like some of the commonalities were, well, we volunteered to come here. This was
mhm,
voluntary, and we came here to learn. That's
mhm.
why when I was sent, told it's not my time, my work's not done yet. But this was part of, you had to see this to continue on or whatever. And that was always one of the core things they would always say is like, yeah, we're here to do work, man. We're here to show love to each other. It's, non-duality is what we need to teach people. We need to show people we're all God. We're all one thing. They'd
Mhm.
all use different language, but it was the same concept, the same idea.
Yeah.
Some people would say we are the universe, or we are
Mhm.
God, or we are infinity, we are love, we're the source, or whatever. They call
Mm.
it different things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so it sort of reminds me of what you just said right there, that there's like a rec room in heaven, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, you have to grant it a bit of poetic license. I'm not necessarily speaking very literally, and like you say, people and cultures put different labels on the same kinds of phenomenon. It's really about the pattern of it. I
Yeah.
think there are basically two options when it comes to life, which is either that, like, we come from nothing, pop into the world, live a life, die, and return to nothing. Or we come from everything, pop out of the world, live a life, transcend, return to everything.
hmm
Um,
Well, and using empiric consistent logic, you could say we do both.
well,
you know,
depending
we
on
can
whether it's a
embrace
dark
that
universe or a light universe.
part of us does go to nothing, go into nothing. It doesn't exist anymore because it never existed to begin with. Like a lot of
Wow.
people, I think this is a word that we take for granted, but can be very powerful in conveying an idea. Is this word exist? What
Mm,
does it really mean to exist? To exist, you think of something that is tangible, like a chair exists, the rock exists, the tree here exists, I exist.
Being.
Yeah. And, but really, consciousness, something like consciousness, does it exist?
hmm
Is it a thing that you can point to, like a rock or a tree or a objective object that we can all objectively measure, agree on, verify, you know,
It's an
is
interesting question.
consciousness? Yeah, because it's so private. It's by its nature subjective.
hmm
And so you could say that consciousness doesn't exist, in that way.
Well, it
And
doesn't
that's
exist in
part of the
something you can.
problem. How are you going to ask for evidence? Like
You
if you
can't
say,
point to it.
yeah, you can
It's not.
never,
It's not something you can point to in the world, and it's not something you can poke with a stick. So in those respects, it's not something that exists. But no experience exists without it. And what's a world with an unexperienced world? This is indistinguishable from nothing.
right. Yeah, it's
So
like Sam Harris, Sam Harris is a neurosurgeon and a philosopher and
there's one
speaker.
brute fact. There's one brute
Yeah.
fact: experiencing,
Yeah, and he
experiencing
also
nothing.
says that he says there is absolutely no evidence for consciousness in the physical world.
No, the physical laws don't predict consciousness. The physical laws that we're aware of, the physical laws don't explain consciousness,
Right.
and the physical laws don't require consciousness.
Roger Penrose, he said that consciousness is not computable
Mm,
because you can make computation that describes the behavior of things or predicts the behavior outcomes of certain things. There's equations to it, but it'll never understand. The mathematics will never have an understanding itself. because it's just a description. So I think this is based on what's that formula? It's a theorem.
Incompleteness.
Yes, incompleteness theorem. Right.
Yeah.
Right. You can never. There's always something you're not going to know, and it goes in for infinity. You'll never get to the fundamental answer of anything. Using
the halting problem.
right.
Yeah, I'm working on bridging that gap from my perspective.
All right. Yeah.
I mean, I've only loosely touched on it in the group and everything, but now that my personal situation is resolving, I'll now have the time to go back to that.
Yeah.
So I can expand on that more.
Yeah, I think someone's done that too. I think I saw somewhere somebody debunked that whole incompleteness theorem interpretation that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if they really did. I mean, everybody's going to say something, People are going to say all kinds of shit, but
yeah, everybody's got to make a living.
yeah, it's a good book. Makes for a good book sale.
Yeah. The self-interest.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
Introduced you to the wonders of the fantabulon layer.
Yeah. The T-jumps of the world.
You know that guy, that Langham guy, Chris Langham?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And the CTMU?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
The smartest man in the world. He's like this. Somebody said he's like the smartest dumb motherfucker.
The smartest obscurantist in the world.
Yeah.
Well, I made up the idea of the fantabulon layer to lampoon Chris Langham.
Mm-hmm.
And I started picking it around with ChatGPT and coming up with all sorts of mashed together words, just as a laugh, really. I started to think at some point over the last couple of days that actually I'd accidentally stumbled on something that might be philosophically useful. I'm like, that ruins the joke.
Well, I've been enjoying
Part
that.
Part of me was excited and thought, oh, okay, this might be something worth pursuing here. The other part was like, well, no, but that kills the humor. So I've got this delicate balance to deal with now. It's like, do I retain the absurdism, or do I actually think, well, maybe there is some benefit to coining this phrase. The fantabulon layer and the fantabulons and all of the
I think you get more philosophy out of it.
It's a whole fresh ontology. Nobody is. It's considered that the primitive might be the fantabulon layer. It's hard to grasp what it is, but I decided that what you do to get to the fantabulon layer is you go through Advaita Vedanta, and so you remove the material world, and then you go through Denatarian eliminatism and remove consciousness. Basically, what are you left with? Anything? It's like, I'm not sure I am left with anything. What you're left with is the fantabulon layer. So and
fantabulum.
Fantabulum.
Yeah. You could probably get more value from Darth Dawkins. Did you see him? I posted a video of him debating this Buddhist philosopher. It was hilarious. The guy, because he's like an academic, like really highly educated academic.
Oh, yes, I did see that. Yes.
Wasn't that hilarious? That was hilarious, man. Darth Dawkins was such an asshole. And, the guy was like, I don't understand. Is this a joke? What is it? What's going on?
Wow.
This guy's acting like a child.
Well, it very much seems to come with the territory, doesn't it? If you're going to use a presuppositionalist argument, then you're going to need to be very front-footed. You're going to need to be very dominant, and it's basically going to come down to, like, are you going to be able to browbeat the other person?
Yeah, that's the whole game.
Yeah, that's the strategy to CPA. It's basically just shut down the opposing interlocutor.
Yeah, just
And
trigger
that's
them.
it.
Yeah,
You're kind of supposed to put them in, like, what do you call zugzwang.
Yeah. It's like, these are my toys, and we're going to play with my toys the way I want to play with my toys.
hmm
Basically, to put it in simple terms.
yeah.
So
They frame the
in
argument.
in chess, if it's your move and you've got no good move to make, right, you're not necessarily in checkmate, but any possible move is going to be one that weakens your position and leads you to lose the game. They call that zugzwang.
hmm
So
hmm
I think that's what the precept is doing to their
Yeah.
interlocutor. They're saying, I'm going to give you no moves you can make. And
Yeah.
they do
The only
that,
thing
but
you
they
can
do
do
that.
is just keep asking them, how do you prove your fundamental, how do you prove the premise of your argument? Just keep asking them that same question over and over again.
Right.
Mhm.
You know, I understand
That's-
that my worldview is incoherent, doesn't make sense, but can you go ahead and tell me, how do you prove your first premise?
Mm.
And then
And
they'll
then they'll
just
always
be,
say it's special revelation,
yeah,
as if
prove
that's
it.
not special pleading.
Yeah, special pleading.
Special pleadulation.
I'm going to use that from now on. Great
Yeah,
way to
man.
describe it.
What pleadulation? Yeah. So one of the other ways I characterize what they do is, Pokemon cards.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So they take a blank one of those, and under every
Mhm.
attribute, they just draw a big infinity symbol.
Mm.
And then they say, this is my Pokemon card. We're playing top trumps. What have you got? My top trump
Mhm.
card is better than your top trump card because I've got
Yep.
all the infinity symbols written on mine. So that's what the pre-sub has done. They've just given themselves the
They just
most gargantuan
define their
possible in their
they
corner.
define their premise as just impossible to you can't argue against something that's perfect, that's totally perfect, absolute, fundamental to everything. How can you argue against that? That's like
Well,
the
by using
fundamental
the
thing.
perfection paradox, that's what you can do. You can point to the ridiculousness of perfection itself and how the perfect qualities all are self-undermining. So
Yeah. But
Yeah.
how do you
you
know
don't
it's
have to necessarily
undermining
go for the
without
problem of
God?
evil. What's that? Sorry.
How do you know that it's undermining anything without God, Paul?
That's very interesting. I'm not sure I was prepared for that move.
Yeah, that's how they hit you. That's exactly how they come at you. Like, it's
But the
just
thing is,
they just repeat. They just go and repeat the same line.
I'm a theist, so I haven't
Yeah.
not got God.
Yeah,
I've got
yeah,
God.
yeah, yeah.
So they don't get to do that to me. They get to do that against the atheists.
Yeah, the
But
unbelievers.
they don't get to say, how do you do X without God? It's like, no, I'm not without God. I'm with God. I may
Yeah.
not be with their conception of God. But if they're
Yeah.
saying you need a God to have logic, it's like, well, I've got one, so don't worry about it.
Well, they'll ask you, yeah, but it's got to be the Christian God. Remember, that's the
Why?
precept. It's got to be the Christian God, because the Christian God is revealed by definition. He has revealed himself through the Bible. So he's the revealed. So you have special revelation.
Right.
And
So
that's how we know.
worship.
Yeah, like
Scripture
that's how we
worship,
know.
idolatry.
Yeah, it's in the Bible.
What they're worshipping is an artifact of the Roman Empire. That's scripture worship. That's not worshiping the Lord.
Right. But
I would just
worship
outright reject the New Testament right from the
Emperor
get-go. So they don't even have anything.
they really don't. Like half the letters of Paul's are forgeries. And he was really the creator of Christianity, really. Like his church won out. So, half of his shit was forged after his death because they worshiped him like a fucking deity
Jesus.
himself. Like Jesus. He was Jesus. I think he was
Mhm.
Jesus. He was who
Oh,
he was talking about.
That's what I think. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
I think Jesus is just the ideological abstract that he
yeah.
used
Paul made
to
that shit up.
formulate his ideology.
Paul was at least the source of the wisdom of Jesus. Then.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah. He made himself an apostle. He was like, and the people at the Church of Jerusalem were like, "Who is this guy that he should be an apostle? Who approved this?" And Paul's like, "I don't
Yeah,
need y'all's fucking approval. I just had a vision of Jesus himself, motherfucker. I don't need you to
yeah.
approve shit."
See, I would argue that through his guilt, he became aware of his Buddha nature and
Yeah,
and attempted to turn that around.
yeah,
Oh,
man, because he
to
was a
fulfill his
thug,
karma.
man.
Yeah.
To
He
fulfill
was,
his karma, right?
yeah.
So what he had trauma based guilt, transcendent experience that
Yes.
led him to recognition of nothing, essentially of his no oneness.
And he
And
could have had some kind of what do they call that? You know, when your lobes in your brain, left side of your brain, kind of like has like a shock or some sort of. If you see light, like a bright light, it'll cause your lobes to kind of misfire, and you go into seizures.
I can't remember the name, but I know what you're talking about.
I mean, a lot of people say that when that happens, they have deep religious experience, kind of
Mhm.
like NDEs, you know, like you go through a really deep sort of experience. And I think his guilt on top of that experience probably made it very profound to where he became a Christian,
yeah,
you know, to just go radically to the left like that would take something very dramatic to happen,
or
you
maybe
know.
he
Yeah.
got very hungry on the road to Damascus, and he saw
Yeah.
some
I was going to
fungi
go there
growing under
next.
a tree,
Yep.
and consumed those out of desperation, and
Yeah.
realized his oneness with everything,
Yeah.
and
Well,
started to think,
even starvation itself will cause that.
there you go.
Because
Yeah, trauma. Yeah.
if you starve long enough, you'll experience delirium, and that's
Hmm.
Hmm.
what brought me back around to all of this. Is that I tried a 7-day fast, but I didn't do it properly, and that
Mm.
caused me to experience some delirium. And then I got the epiphany for my position basically,
Yeah.
and I've been working on it ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I only stopped being an atheist when there was a death in the family, and the grief got to me to the point where I had like my own sort of road to, not quite Damascus, but kind of like the suburbs, the road to the suburbs of Damascus.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Um, and things changed. I didn't become a theist straight away, but if I'd have known the term for it, I would have said what I became was an agnostic somethingist. You know,
Yeah.
I no longer had this hard line atheistic point of view. I just felt that, you know, whatever it was I was talking to when I went give her back, because it wasn't just grieving for my aunt, it was for the uncle and cousins that were left behind, and uh, you know, the injustice of that I felt, caused, like, whatever it was that I was talking to had one thing, and that was my rage. And from there, I just started to play around with this idea of what it was that that had my rage, and so I became a bit more of a seeker than the atheist that I'd been up until that point. At some point during my mid-20s, I would say, and then from there it was a case of like finding influences along the way. Like I stumbled across the atheist experience, and started listening to all of their conversations that they had, and learning how, like, I had I always had nagging sensation about certain errors people were making in their reasoning, but I couldn't quite put names to them. And so I learned from Matt Dillahunty and co. that there were things called the argument from ignorance, and the
Hmm.
equivocation fallacy, and a straw man, and all of the logical fallacies that I sort of knew intuitively, but I didn't know the names of them. So I learned that from listening to the atheists. And what I would do is question and shape this somethingism based on their skepticism, and sort of apply critical thinking to this somethingism and say, okay, well, it can't be that, because that would involve this logical fallacy. And then I stumbled upon the fallacy, which was great, because it was like, okay, it doesn't matter if there are bad arguments for the existence of a god
Hmm.
in terms of there being a god. All that means is that the argument fails. It doesn't mean that the conclusion of the argument is wrong.
Right.
And then there was another big influence, which again was from a YouTube channel, which was this charismatic guru type guy who does all these they call them satsangs, where he's got all of these followers and devotees, and they come up and ask a question, and he starts talking Eastern philosophy with them.
Hmm.
And like that really opened my eyes to a different perspective on what theism could be. It was nothing like anything I'd ever been taught or come across in my life. And from there, started to develop ideas of like non-duality and that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And that for me does survive critical thinking,
Right.
which is important.
Right. That's kind of what I was saying that at the top was I'm kind of like left and right brain, so they're always
Mm.
evenly fighting with each other. So it kind of makes things, I kind of reason things out in a different kind of way sometimes, I think, from a lot of people, where I'm really creative on one hand, but I'm also very logical on the other. So the logical side is like a constraint, against going too far left or something. But then, my imaginative side is always asking, well, what does that even mean? What does too far left even mean? Like, what does reality say about that? It's more creative, it's more open. Where the logical side is like,
Oh,
no,
what's
that's
happened
just
here?
stupid. Yeah, it's stupid talk. That's crazy talk.
What is?
It attempts to
Oh, right,
limit
yeah.
your
So
perspective.
you've got kind of like
Yeah.
an internal Mulder and an internal Scully,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
We've got those archetypes in your head,
Yep.
right? So Mulder is always adding 2 and 2 and saying maybe 22, and Scully's there to go, well, yeah, well, let's check 4 first.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So, and maybe the answer is, I don't know, maybe it was a quadratic equation, and like it's 4 or 22 is the answer.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's the very right brain, left brain thing, like you say, the internal Mulder and Scully. What I find
Hmm.
most interesting about the right brain, left brain stuff is that about 20 or 30 years ago, there was some right brain, left brain theories that were debunked.
Hmm.
And so in the popular discourse, what you find is if you mention right brain and left brain, their immediate response almost all of the time is, that's been debunked,
Yeah.
because they think you're talking about a previous theory.
Right.
They think you're talking about this idea that the right brain deals with feelings, the left brain deals with thoughts or whatever.
So
Right?
one's
But
got to be
no,
right and the other's got to
they
be
both
wrong.
deal with feelings. They both deal with thoughts.
Right.
It's just they do them in a different way. The left brain does all that cognitive chopping,
Hmm. Yep.
and the right brain is holistic.
Yeah, that's right.
It deals with the bigger picture stuff,
Yeah. Hmm.
Mhm.
and you need both.
And see the left side is always like, well, I understand your big picture and it looks great and all of this, but we need that little pesky evidence, man. It's always like trying to constrain you against, going
Yeah.
too far with the concept.
Yeah. What's the justification? Where
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
justification?
Where's the justification? What about this problem? What about that problem? And it does that for me. The thing about me is it does that for everything. Like it doesn't matter what we're talking about. Like I don't have any. It's just that, like you said, non-duality sort of survived that whole episode.
Mm.
Like they're at peace with that.
Yeah,
So that's why it sort of resonates with me.
I think the neurological data is really enlightening.
Yeah.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
when someone's having a transcendent experience, it's very easy for the materialistically inclined person to come along and say, "Ah, yeah, the brain's doing that. It's a hallucination." You go, "Okay, well, let's have a look side by side at a couple of brain scans. You tell me, just looking at just the brains, which one you think is doing the hallucinating." And one of them's pretty quiet, and the other one's cracking off like it's Independence Day, New Year's Eve, and Christmas
Hmm.
all together. And you go, "Well, clearly that's the one doing the hallucinating." You go, "Okay, fine." And then a little later on, perhaps you can reveal that
You
quieter one.
froze. Yeah.
I don't know if I dropped out. Did I drop out?
Yeah, you did. You dropped out, but I think you're going to say that actually the quieter brain
Mhm.
is the one that's, having the visions and the
Mhm.
experiences, the rich
Mhm.
experience. Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
NDEs are all about. That's
Yeah.
why they're so fascinating, because they measure time. We've gotten to the point where we can measure when events happen, and we can
Mhm.
compare that to the reports, and really close in on a time frame of when the person was, flatlined, so to speak. And that if that's the time that they're experiencing, say, this conversation in the hospital theater or somewhere in the lobby, they can sort of verify those conversations or those objects and those things. And these are the people I used to really talk to at the ION stuff, and really, really interesting how how the brain, when it's in really quiet mode, is when it's able to generate these sort of experiences.
Mm.
Like, how would that happen?
Mhm. Well,
Then why
You
is
can get there through meditation.
you get there through
exactly.
meditation? Exactly.
But the question is, does the psychedelic or the meditation or the self-inquiry or the trauma, does it create hallucination, or does it suppress a regular form of hallucination that we normally live with? The whole dualistic frame is that the dualistic frame within which we perceive to be living, is that the hallucinated part?
Well,
I,
there's
I think it's both. Both.
Mm.
It's just dependent on the composition of the experiencer.
mhm. And sometimes there's an inverse effect. When your brain is not filtering as much, then you're able to receive more, of the signals of,
Yeah.
what's being processed. Like, our brains limit, what, like 98% of the stuff in our visual field.
Mm.
98% of our stuff in our visual field is unconsciously processed in our brain. We don't really see that. We're not really conscious of that. Same with hearing, the whole binding problem, the
Yeah.
brain comes into
Mhm.
play.
Peripheral vision and all that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yet, like, this is why you wonder, if that's the case, then why are baseball players able to catch, these hard balls coming in at, 40 miles an hour?
Mm.
How can they
Potential.
do that? How are they able to consciously, you know, calculate the speed of the ball, the
Yeah.
distance between him and the ball, and where his hand needs to be in order to catch that ball coming in at 40 miles an hour with the right amount of force and the right amount of strength behind that catch?
Mm.
And not
That's
to mention the rest
that.
of his body has to align into that formation. But what they say is that actually your brain sees all of that and
Mhm.
processes all of it very consciously. It's just
Yep.
that you aren't conscious of it. This other person
Mhm.
is.
Yeah,
And
it's the rap.
he's yeah,
I was just gonna say it's the rapid state of occurrence
yeah,
that the brain's constantly going through. You know,
Mm.
for visual representation, you remember Knight Rider kit, the
yeah.
car. You know,
Hmm.
the light in the front.
Yep.
That's basically what the brain's doing, but all the time
Yeah. Yeah.
This,
and
this
rapidly,
is
and that's
this is
why
what I used to. This is
we
what I used to
define.
do playing soccer at school, right? With the whole jumpers for goalposts thing. right? I regularly took the corners because I was quite good at crossing. So what I found I would do is I would take a quick glance at what was going on in the penalty box, and then I'd take that information in and model it in my head, and without looking even further at what was going on, I would create a model of what I imagined was going on, and then put my concentration on the ball and put the ball in such a way as that imagined model was what was happening in there would create the most dangerous opportunity. And so it wasn't really necessarily based on actual sense data after that initial recce. It was all just a projection, really, in my mind. But the amount of times that it turned out that the ball that was put in was just the right ball that was needed to create the maximal danger. I mean, it wasn't always turned into a scoring opportunity, but I was just relying on those instincts, those modeling instincts that have been, I think, bred into us through our the evolution of our ancestors. I mean, they weren't playing soccer necessarily, but they were doing
Hmm.
other things that made it really, really important to model the environment and what was going on in terms of like the physics of things.
Right, right. Um, there was one. I'm trying to look for him now on here. Uh, uh, yeah, I'm looking for. He was debating this identity theorist. There's this philosopher who's an identity theorist, and he was debating with this other neuroscientist and philosopher and writer and all this kind of stuff. And he was trying to say that consciousness comes from doing stuff. So he
Mhm.
said that, like, if you want to experience what it's like to ride a bike, you ride a bike.
Mm.
It doesn't come from neurons in your brain. It comes from doing stuff. That's more fundamental than the neural thing. So he was against the whole consciousness comes from the brain theory.
Mm.
And he was trying to say that, it comes from doing stuff. So then the other guy, the identity theorist, who does believe that, the other way, and he was saying, well, then what role does the brain play then? I mean, why even have a brain if that's the case? And he was saying, well, no, the brain is processing, it's turning that activity in reality, it's turning it into a unified theater for you. And it has to process that information. you know this is why everything comes late. It comes at a different time, before you're even aware of it.
Mm.
you know you have to do this thing first, and then it gets processed in your brain as a memory or encoded or whatever, and then that's where your consciousness experience sort of emerges from that. So I don't know if you guys ever heard that theory. I was looking for it to see.
Uh,
I mean, it's got
I
some
think
obvious problems for me, but the guy's like really
yeah.
convinced. Like, I
Mm.
don't
Well,
know.
I think we can gain a sense of familiarity without without actually experiencing something. Like if I watch somebody write something down, I can get an idea that they're writing something down. You know what I mean? And then try to
Yeah.
replicate that myself.
Hmm. Right.
Basically, in simple terms, monkey see, monkey do.
Right. Exactly. You
And I
copy.
think a lot of our behavior and identity is based on that because we're
Hmm.
because we're a social species.
Yeah.
And we can observe that in other primates as well.
But I
We
think
can
what
replicate
he's
each other's
what
behavior.
what he would tell you is that, well, the act of looking and using your eyes is what creates that conscious experience. He'd say that you're just doing, even if you think that you're just observing something, not necessarily doing the thing you're observing.
Mm.
It's the observing is what's giving you that perspective, that experiential perspective.
It's
I would say,
active,
like,
not passive.
how can you observe if you're not conscious, though?
Yeah, right, right, right. So then he was, I think, I have the video right here. check it out. But part of it is he yeah, let me let him
Sure,
speak
sure.
for himself, because
Okay.
hold on. Pretty interesting. Hold on. Present. Share screen.
Seems to suggest that somehow the lines are
Can you hear
being
anything? I can't.
perceived by the brain as
can.
lines, whereas in fact those cells
You're able to
may
hear?
not at all be
I am.
seeing lines in any sense. They may be being used as part of a massive population code that allows the brain to respond not just to lines but to all sorts of other stimuli. It's not even clear that I mean, and certainly they are not only sensitive to lines. You can they're sensitive to all sorts of things. In order to see a line, you need a population of many cells that have many different properties. So to say that they represent the line seems to suggest that this representation is being seen by other parts of the brain, and we don't know how they're being seen.
I mean, I don't know why it would carry the suggestion that they be seen, because of what it's carrying. The suggestion is that there's a characterization of how the world would have to be in order for the state to be accurate, and that if you just activated those systems alone without the stimulus in the environment, the organism would respond as though the stimulus was there. Now, I guess you're going to say, yeah, so what? Because you just get produced the same kind of activity. So if it's wired in the same way, you'll get the same response. But it starts to look like maybe there's mostly just a verbal issue at that point.
For me, this is just a verbal issue. It's just that the word representation has led, in the study of vision anyway, as concerns, for example, this question of the blind spot and the stability of the visual world. Thinking in terms of representations, it's just the word itself has led people to believe that there was a need for these compensation mechanisms. That's my only, but I have no issue with the fact that there are cells in the brain that are sensitive. I prefer just using the cells as sensitive to moving lines, but saying that they
All right.
represent
I better
something.
stop it before I get booted.
Hmm.
I couldn't really hear it anyways. Y'all could hear it okay though?
It was a little low, but I heard it.
Okay.
What I couldn't make out was whether he was saying lion or lion.
Oh,
Was he talking about a lion,
Sounded
as
like
in
lying
a
to
big
me.
cat, or a line, as in a straight line? He used the word a lot, so I couldn't work out which he was saying.
I couldn't hear the whole thing, so I couldn't hear any
Yeah.
of it. I think he said
Well,
line,
yeah, it's
like
very
straight
different.
line.
It's a very different concept if you're talking about a lion or a lion.
Yeah, a lion.
Yeah, you'll have to share the full video.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. It's a good video. It's a different take, and the identity theorists just kept getting stumped, and because the guy kept, I don't even know which part I played, so
Scott,
don't
can
know.
you jog my memory? Identity theorist. I'm not sure I can recall what that
Yeah.
actually is.
It's kind of like your conscious experience is a direct reflection of your brain state. So there's no difference.
Yeah,
It's an
perfect.
exact,
Yeah.
it's the experiential side of your brain state.
I
So
see.
yeah.
I
Yeah,
wonder
think
what
that-
I wonder
So
what they do with transcendent experience then.
with what? Oh, transcendent.
With transcendent psychedelic experiences, what they say about those then, if there's supposed to be a one-to-one correlation between the brain activity and like mentation, conscious experience.
Yeah, I guess they would say that it's no surprise because the substances affect the brain physically, chemically.
Yeah.
and those chemical changes are going to change the state of your experience.
Hmm.
And so that's why hallucinogens and things like that give you a different perspective of reality, because it's changing your brain state.
True.
So yeah, and someone like Bernardo Castro would 100% agree. He said that's, but the I guess the argument there would be, well, how convenient. Like,
Well, it does
you
change the brain
just
state.
you
It
build your
changes
metaphysics. Yeah,
the brain
go
does
ahead.
less.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
changes that the brain does less, but the
right. And
experience
at first they were
more.
saying it has to be more. You need more activity to have a rich experience. But they've come to learn that that's not true at all.
Yeah. But that's where the correlation breaks down. So the identity theorist has got a problem there.
Yeah, I had this discussion with somebody and they were disagreeing with that. I was trying to
Really?
tell them that, yeah, they were like saying, no, I think even T Jump was arguing with somebody about that, with Eric Hernandez. And he was saying psychedelics actually inhibit brain function. So why should the experience be so lucid and rich and all of that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he was saying that, well, brain science has since learned that it's not about how much activity, it's about what part of the brain
Which activity? Yes.
is, working harder than in others. Like
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
the same thing with synesthesia and things like that. Like you wonder, how do they have all these superpowers of hearing and color and, being able to count numbers like super, super duper high, faster than a calculator? Like, how do they do this shit? And it's like their brain is just inhibited, you know.
Mm. See,
Yeah, it's like
I think
the example that I use of
that's right.
pareidolia,
Yeah.
where I have issues with trusting people, so I'm constantly on guard for people.
Seeing patterns.
That's
Yeah.
why I see stuff all the time.
Mm.
Hmm.
So like my brain kind of constricts itself into constantly seeking to identify a threat. And
So earlier on, Scott,
humans are the greatest threat.
you said that you gave an example of something that you thought was the strongest argument for the materialists, and I've got an alternative to that. I think that the strongest argument for the materialists comes from Dan Dennett, the evolutionary idea of a virtual workspace.
Hmm.
So you've got early life with its stimulus and response that doesn't really have so much of a conscious experience. But then there's an evolutionary advantage to put in a space in between the stimulus and the response. And so the organisms that started to develop a proto form of a virtual workspace had an evolutionary advantage, and it built up from there till we have the perception that we are conscious, although that's just a conglomerate of advances in stimulus detection and cognition, that actually what we've got is a virtual workspace. So
Right. Yeah, I
that
heard that theory before.
that for me is the strongest opposition to idealism, because what it does is it says there's no hard problem of consciousness to solve. Consciousness is a virtual workspace granted to us by evolution. And so if we were to call solutions to the hard problem of consciousness atheodicies, as opposed to the theodicies that are dealing with the problem of evil, so atheodicies are dealing with the problem of experience, then the virtual workspace theory, I think, is the strongest atheodicy out there.
Hmm. So what does it say as to why is there a conscious experience at all?
Because it puts a middleman between stimulus and response.
It's the medium
Oh.
for experience.
If you can have that virtual workspace, if the stimulus feels like something, then you can have a cognitive process
Hmm.
that doesn't just go straight from stimulus to response. It can involve consideration and internal modeling to
Hmm.
better predict what's going on in the environment.
Yeah. And
Now,
you know, this kind of activity, though, it doesn't just happen in brains.
Mhm.
That sort of
Jellyfish
activity.
Fields of awareness.
Yeah,
Is it
there's
jellyfish that look conscious but don't have a brain?
well, there's slime mold that
Mm.
has no nervous system, no brain, and yet it
Mm.
figures out mazes and you know, it plans ahead for the future.
Mm.
It makes irrational decisions sometimes. Yeah, it does a lot of wild stuff. And then, you know, then you can look at amoeba, like single cell amoebas, you know where to go for food. They know how to, you know, remember things and go back to where the food source was.
Let's
You know,
zoom in even more to an apparently non-conscious entity, the electron. In a circuit, the electron follows a path of least resistance. How does it
yeah,
know that? How does it know where the path of least resistance is at? I mean, I say no as if it's got a conscious awareness, but I don't know. Maybe the panpsychists think that it does. But then, of course, now in
well, that's
terms
the
of
free energy principle.
okay,
Well, I would say it comes down to awareness, really.
Well,
Each
yeah,
time
that's what awareness
structure
is.
generates a field of awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
not necessarily that it's conscious or anything. Because, like, does it know that it's a mold? Things like that. Yeah.
No, it doesn't understand anything. So, yeah, that's kind of like yeah, it's like a field of awareness from, you know, and again, if it's true, if quantum theory is true, and I think it is, quantum field theory, it would say that everything is like that. You know, it comes from a field of, you know, potential, and this would incorporate conscious beings as well as unconscious things. Um, and most things have some measure of, like you said, some measure of and I think that's from the free energy principle. And they were saying that that's, you know, looking into that, it's like that's the course of least resistance.
mm,
There's just a principle in the fundamental reality that says you take the course of least resistance every time, and consciousness gives you
Brain
that.
does.
Yeah, it's awareness of that. You know,
I know
it's
quite a
always
few
look.
people who violate that principle.
Yeah,
What
They
was
seem,
that?
I said I know quite a few people who seem to violate that principle. They seem to take the path of most resistance sometimes. It's like they want the challenge.
yeah.
I'm one of those people. I'd like to be challenged on everything.
So
But it
yeah,
seems
if
to
you can
me,
have the same result in processing and behavioral outcomes minus consciousness, wouldn't that be more efficient? Yeah, that's a good question. Why couldn't all this stuff go on in the dark?
mm, whose question was that?
We can't
Cody.
see in the dark.
Oh,
The human can't see in the dark, I would imagine. So
Yeah,
that's why we aspire towards the light.
yeah. So you would say, really, I think through our conversation, you would say that really the awareness is all the way down there to everything. Everything is
Yeah.
aware already. So that question doesn't really make sense because everything is aware. There's no such thing as something with minus awareness.
hmm.
Is that what you mean?
No, not quite.
Yeah,
I think it's
but you know, I guess
for
what he's
organic,
saying is
just
that,
for organics.
yeah, but I guess what he's really saying, anyways, is it'd be more energy efficient not to have consciousness. Well, what about consciousness just is kind of like a side effect of evolution, like kind of like our chins or male nipples,
Hmm.
like maybe it's just an accident, a
Like,
nature's
like, like,
accident.
Well, as I've described, I think it's just generated from accumulated states of awareness through the various types of sensory reception, and it's basically just a vehicle for navigation in complex environments in order to promote overall survival.
Hmm.
Chins, though, Scott, they're for snooker.
Yeah.
That's what the chin's for, to make snooker easier.
Yeah. But it would seem weird. It would seem kind of arbitrary. Like if consciousness was an accidental result of evolution, like a little side effect, an accidental side effect, then you could say that about really anything because
Well, I
consciousness
think
is
it's just
so important.
the logical procession from awareness.
Yeah. Of course. That's why, like on my understanding, that makes sense to me is that the foundation of reality is not this human level consciousness or anything like that. It's not
Mhm.
anthropomorphic or anything like that. It's just awareness. It's just sort of like a built-in law of anything that exists is going to, you know, interact with other things. The dichotomy is going to be there. It's inevitable. That's what the dualism is, but it doesn't necessarily
Just to
reflect
piggyback on that,
everything about
I do agree
reality.
with you. It doesn't have to be anthropomorphic in any way. I'd also like to just add that it can still be useful to conceive of it that way, just simply because as a pedagogical tool, we can relate to it better if we consider it in a sort of symbological, metaphorical way to be anthropomorphized. So I'm not saying that we should conceptually anthropomorphize it, just simply that in terms of for us human beings to get a grip on it.
Well, then again,
I think it's
I'm
just
bar.
I was
Yeah,
just going to say, I think that's just our tendency to
yeah,
anthropomorphize.
and
Because
I borrow
we're
that
constantly
from.
sending. I'm sorry. We're just because we're constantly sending signal out there, and we want feedback. So when we don't get feedback, we project our own identity in order to receive that feedback. Well, to receive the perception of that feedback.
Nice. That's a good way of putting it.
All right, Logan's out there. What's up, man? Fight on the fence. I'm just writing them. Fight on the fence. Yeah. It's to be parsimonious. Like but again, like I was saying earlier, parsimony isn't like a hard fast rule that reality has to abide by in any form or fashion. Like the only reason I would describe my view as simple as possible is because the simpler it is, the more parsimonious it is. you know but that doesn't mean that reality has to be parsimonious or reality has to be as simple as possible. It's just that you don't have, you can build on that because you haven't baked in a bunch of assumptions that are going to crumble the whole house of cards. So
Yeah,
the less
Occam's razor
assumptions you
doesn't tell
make
you what.
going in, maybe the closer you'll get to whatever the facts really are.
The razor, Occam's razor, doesn't tell you what's true, but it's a good guideline principle to help you to rank order bullshit stories.
Yeah.
Right.
If
That's
all
how
the
I
stories
approach
are
it.
bullshit, if all the stories are bullshit, that doesn't necessarily mean that all bullshit is born equal. You can have better and worse bullshit, more parsimonious bullshit than other bullshit.
Right. It's like Cody said, the first unsupported assumption is that there is not a personal process going on. Yeah, it's an assumption. But it would be argued to be the most parsimonious assumption to make because um it's much more, you're actually entailing something much more complicated when you talk about a personal God. He's got lots of attributes.
Yeah.
In fact, an infinity of them.
My theism accepts an impersonal God and is open to a personal God, but not convinced of that part. So I would say what I do believe is that there is an impersonal, non-dualistic, panentheistic God, and that if it is personal, as then I'm willing to accept that that's at least possible, but I don't see anything compelling me in that direction.
Yeah.
I'm open to it. I'm not one of these people who says, "Well, if I'm not aware of an argument for a position, then it means that there isn't one." It's a big world out there.
Well, I
There's
mean, the whole
loads of
point
stuff I haven't heard.
one of the strongest points of idealism is the fact that it tries to be as parsimonious as possible without being solipsistic.
Yeah.
It's like it's the whole point is to be as parsimonious as possible. So you don't want to make the mind the most complex thing we could ever imagine in the universe. That would directly be fighting against some of the strong points of idealism, I think. But it's not saying that isn't necessarily true. Who knows? No, like you said, nobody knows that. But we don't want to assume the most complex thing. We want to assume the most simple thing, and it's an assumption.
Yeah.
But it's a simpler assumption. Without going totally nothing. Like Lawrence Krauss or somebody. Basically. I mean, what does nothing even mean? Then we get into that. Then maybe they're right, because maybe we're just defining nothing all wrong here. Maybe nothing is something of some kind.
Yeah, when there's zero money in my bank account, it's not actually nothing. It's like vast potential there. It's low level energy space
Yeah.
from which a whole universe could come into being.
Yeah, you could generate interest in that 0.00001 value.
Another problem I think a lot of people have with idealism and these consciousness fundamental sort of models is that it sounds like it's very anthropomorphic, like it's very me, I'm special, I'm important because hey, I'm conscious, therefore the entire fucking universe is conscious, like I'm that important. This whole thing revolves around me. But that's sort of weird because who says that humans are the only thing that's conscious? Who told you we're that special? What we're trying to say is we're not that special. Like,
hang on, surely you're not telling me it's arrogant for me to say I am God.
right? Yeah, you're not arrogant at all. You're just a realist. You're just a realist.
I like Cody's take there.
What do you say?
Sapiocentric.
Oh yeah,
there it goes.
I prefer sapiocentric rather than anthropomorphic because it might not all be human. That's right.
Yeah, and we could easily see that it's not all human. There are other conscious entities out here.
Exactly.
I forget who it was, but I heard, I think it was a philosopher talking about how it's so interesting that what people specialize in tends to be what they decide is foundational. So
Yes.
a lot of the mathematicians say that it's all numbers, really, and a philosopher will be quite likely to say that it's all thought, whereas like a physicist more likely to say, oh, it's all physical. There's like what we constantly deal with is most likely to be the idea that we'll think is like, oh yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. One person said that it's easy, just presuppose it.
That's what I do.
Yeah. That's right.
I presuppose that all presuppositions are false.
Yeah. My philosophy is that there is no philosophy.
My opinion is that nobody is entitled to their opinion.
That's right. Yeah, there is no absolute truth at all, ever. Absolutely. You know, I got one atheist like that. He about drove him crazy. We were in a Facebook debate, and I was trolling him. I was pretending to be a theist, a presuppositionalist at that. And so I was like, so I said, do you believe that that's true? Do you even believe in absolute truth? And he's like, no, I don't believe in absolute truth. Absolute truth, it does not exist. And I was like, are you absolutely sure of that? I just kept drilling
I've
down
had some
on
of them try that on me.
him. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
What happened?
Oh, that's beautiful.
I just flip it back on them to justify the absolute.
Yeah. Yeah, you have some absolute evidence of that. Yeah, people dig themselves in the holes. I was like, dude, you can put the shovel down anytime you want, man. Like, just digging yourself a hole.
I much prefer the humble atheists who don't say
Questions.
statements like "there is no evidence."
Oh
You
yeah,
know?
yeah.
They make a much more subjective statement. They say, to my present knowledge and understanding, there's no compelling evidence.
And they
Like,
would be just as valid. That statement is just as valid because
Yeah.
believing because you haven't have any good reason to believe it is probably has the same effect of the thing not existing anyways. So
The problem. Oops, sorry.
yeah, go
The
right ahead.
problem for me, when it comes to evidence is that there's claims of evidence, and there's only reference to evidence, but there's no substantial concrete link that this evidence is what they're claiming that it's evidence for.
Hmm.
These are just opinions, especially
Right.
with the design argument. We're just inferring our perception of design on genetics and DNA, and then claiming that this is, externally designed, when
Hmm.
it's just our inference of design.
Yeah. Yeah. And our brain is a pattern seeking sort of machine there. It's going to see patterns and everything and
It's gonna want to
infer
put
that.
in this box or that box.
Hmm. Yeah. And Caleb says, I try to look at the total theory instead of a single piece of evidence or a single argument, right?
yes, completely. Yeah, because not every exhibit or testimony is supposed to be final closing. So when somebody says, "Oh, give me your best evidence," what they're really doing, it sounds generous, doesn't it? Because they want your best. But
Mhm.
what they're really
Mm.
saying is like, you're going to create your entire case, but I'm only going to allow you to present one exhibit or one testimony, or whatever you give me is going to have to be on a postage stamp, and it's going to have to do the whole thing right now.
Mhm.
That's just not
Yeah.
reasonable. What Caleb is suggesting there, it's like you don't ask for evidence, you ask for a case, you ask for a rationale, you ask for a justification, and that's going to include evidences, that's going to include arguments, it's going to include maybe intuitions or something. It's going to include things like there's a perennial golden thread between traditions that suggest this, and it keeps coming up time and time again, this notion. I mean, that isn't necessarily direct evidence, but it's kind of circumstantial. It suggests that there might be something to look into. And then if you have got more sort of like empirical evidence and solid arguments that make up your rationale, then you can get to a place of reasoned confidence from which there's a small step of faith to take from "this is probably true" to "I think this is the case."
Mhm.
Yeah, what always gets me is when they'll ask, "Well, what evidence will you accept?" I'm like, it doesn't matter what I accept. If the evidence is conclusive, then I would have
Yeah.
no choice to accept it other than to just outright deny it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's a better question than what evidence you would accept, and that's what evidence would you expect? Because an absence of evidence in and of itself, in the absence of expectation of evidence, doesn't really tell you anything. But if you would expect certain evidence and then there's an absence of evidence, then that's more indicative.
And that's evidence in itself,
Hmm.
because
Yeah.
that's how the method of verification happens. It's like you make a prediction, and when the prediction doesn't come through as calculated, then you can say you were wrong in your calculations. You know, that theory was wrong.
Well, you
So that's
could say you're
evidence.
wrong,
The
or
evidence
you
of
could
it
say
is
that
the
people are
fact that
right.
we applied it and it didn't work.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know.
So you could say the evidence shows that I was wrong, or you could say, well, actually I was right, but there's something else that makes the evidence different. So you put a sticking plaster over your error and call it dark matter or dark energy, and you say, well, no, the formulas are right. It's just they're out because of this, and then you have this new mystery that you've developed on the basis of you saying, well, no, the model was right. It's just there are errors because of something that we hadn't yet considered, and we hadn't accounted for. It's out there. It's a phenomenon. We know that the equations were right because da, 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 da. You don't necessarily say you were wrong. You could say, well, I'm right up to a point. I'm right plus an extra mystery that we haven't solved, and I think that is your approach is better. Where you say the
Yeah.
evidence doesn't match the expectation, it's like, well, okay, let's rethink it, rather than say, oh, we were right, plus
We
there's
were
an
right. You were
additional
wrong.
mystery.
You know, it's called the problem of fallibilism. You know,
Mhm.
it's like that paradox that arises when considering the implications of being fallible, which means that our knowledge and beliefs are not necessarily true or certain. You know,
Mm.
and and there's like examples of that in history. You know, like especially in science. Like I think there was a planet that was expected to be in this particular area based on our understanding of gravity and how it works
Mm.
and the bodies that we've you know observed in the heavens.
Mhm.
Yet when we made the prediction, it didn't come out, but that was because there was another huge body we didn't know about that was also playing a role
Mm.
in the behavior. So the fallibilism failed.
Mm.
They were like saying, yeah, well, this proves fallible. If it, there's no good reason to believe that's true. Or actually, they went stronger and said it's not true. This is not true that gravity works this way because
Mm.
you made a calculation that the planets would be here at this particular time and it didn't happen. And actually, all his equations were correct.
Mm.
But it's just that there was another factor involved that they didn't know about.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's what brings me to the problem of justified true beliefs.
Hmm.
Because even if excuse me, even if you have justification for your beliefs, they could still be wrong.
Yes,
And
yes.
I've experienced that many times in my life where I, for instance, went around a corner and expect that something is going to be there. And then when it's not there, that cognitive dissonance hits and it hits you like a brick wall. You're like, well, what the heck? To put it in simple terms,
Hmm.
it's like when expectation doesn't meet reality, or vice versa.
Right, right. And it looks like it should. There's no logical reason it shouldn't work out that way. But boom. It's just like the whole thing I was talking about with the parsimony. A lot of people
Mhm.
mistake parsimony as a hard fast rule. It's just a guide to the
Mm.
to make the most conservative sort of views you can based on what you have to work with.
Yeah, yeah, just to try to rule out excess, basically.
Yeah,
That's
right.
how I approach it, at least.
And then I think the
Yeah.
next step is probably coherence. Like, because coherence doesn't necessarily rule things in, but a lack of coherence is probably something you should want to rule out. If
Hmm. Hmm.
if your meta theory isn't even coherent, then at least you should consider rank ordering it down in terms of what you consider.
Well, look, quantum tunneling. How the hell is quantum tunneling coherent? You know, like how can energy pass through a barrier, you know, that it shouldn't? You know, how does that happen? You know, this is considered mass, and it's going through a barrier. In fact, it does it so much that we have a whole planet full of trees and grass and bushes, and it's called photosynthesis. You know, that's like how it happens. Like they used to call it FM fucking magic, but really it's
I would say it breaks down to wave particle duality.
well, yeah, that's exactly what it is. That's the whole thing. But the problem with that is, how is wave particle duality coherent when you think of our everyday experience? You know, we're not wave and particles at the same time. You know, we're solid matter,
we
right?
sort of are.
Well, of course, but I'm saying I'm being kind of rhetorical.
Reflected in us, though.
Yeah, I'm kind of being rhetorical, like, you know, like most simple-minded people would ask that question, like, you know, and you could understand if that's all you experience is that, then if you're a fallibilist, you know, or you're someone who, you know, just factors in what we know and to be the most parsimonious we can be, then we would actually say there's no reason to assume quantum tunneling is even a thing, because it doesn't
Maybe
cohere.
wave particle duality is only a problem for people who believe in things.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's what we're getting at. It's like, but the odd thing is, when you're not on that page with them, you're the one that's not being coherent.
Mm.
You know, you're the one now that's not being.
I believe in processes. I don't believe in things. I think that verbs are much more real than nouns.
Yeah.
You know, everything's dynamic, but the way we use our language, we have all of these nouns and noun phrases as if we're talking about some static, extant things. But like, we've only got to zoom in a little bit and find that's never the case. You know, it's never the same river. It's never the same man. There's dynamism everywhere.
Yeah.
But our conceptual brain likes, and our linguistic brain likes to put labels on things and call them nouns.
It's we're driven to identify, because it all comes down to me. You know, what am I?
Yeah. Yeah.
It all comes down to me. But
subjective experience.
I am God after all. I'm God.
Yep.
I do like the Gnostic interpretation of some of the passages from the Christian Bible, where if you replace me with the ego, it makes a lot of sense out of some of the passages. Like if you say, like, none come to the Father except through the ego, essentially that is going through the me. There's, like, you know, there's ego dissolution there. And the whole idea that, like, why hast thou forsaken me whilst up on the cross? Well, like, maybe the ego doesn't necessarily die with a coherent thought that it's just a construct. Maybe you do have to nail it up on a cross for a little while, and it might have something to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which isn't to say that I'm ruling on historicity. I excuse myself from the historicity debate. I don't think that's going anywhere. I just say that a symbolic interpretation has value, without necessarily joining either camp on whether these events are historic or mythological.
Well, I think that if you want to talk about real, you talk about effects and things that it's left behind in the world. So I would think that actually Gnosticism has done more to shape Western culture than we really give credence to. You know, it's like, if you think about dying on the cross, like in Roman culture and Jewish culture, no prophet of God would die on a cross. You know, that was a shame. That was a punishment. That was a humiliation, right? Whereas in Christian culture, Gnostic culture, They looked at, carry your cross with you, like
Mm.
that's the thing to do, is to look at this world as rags and look at the other world as what you're striving for. So this world doesn't matter. And so the cross came to be a symbol of martyrdom, like a symbol of dying for a greater cause or doing something noble and virtuous. So they made it a heroic thing, to die on the cross. And so that's Gnosticism. Gnosticism is the one that, did teach that. Like you were saying, when he died on the cross, it's like, giving up the ego, giving up the things
Yeah.
that you want of the world, the petty desires, your flesh,
Yeah. Basically sacrificing the effigy of the ego.
Yes.
And
Mm.
and that's what Buddhism teaches. It's, basically detaching from yourself and just existing.
Yeah.
And Hinduism and Sufism and the
The
great
Eastern
the
ways,
great
really.
spirit of Native American theology, and that it's a perennial idea. That most cultures come up with it at some point.
Especially communal cultures.
Yeah. I mean, and you see where it came from, like even killing animals as sacrifices to God, child sacrifices. These things were a way of, it was probably also for the people that were doing the sacrifice. They were doing God's will. They were giving up what they probably, if you think about the story of Abraham and Isaac, he was going to kill his child, which was his only beloved son. So that was really destroying Abraham's ego to put a greater purpose first. That's what that story was all about.
Yeah, the same thing with Jesus' sacrifice. Just the whole sacrifice narrative. It's like, what are you willing to give up?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, and if you think about it, that's what life is. Life is just giving up stuff. Like by the time you're dead, you're gonna have given up your health, your money, your sanity. I mean, you give up your, everything that you used to have. I'm lost my hair. It's like you lose everything, man. It's all about letting go of stuff. That's what life's all about, man.
It's attachment is what leads to suffering.
Yeah.
The more you hold on to it, the greater the insecure you become about losing it.
Yeah. And this feeling of control is what fuels the suffering, because once you realize you have no control, you finally submit to it, and then you're at peace with it. It's like, I can't do anything about it. So what the hell, man?
Yeah, you just go with the flow.
Yeah, might as well. I can't. There's just some things I can control or think I can control, and some things I can't. And the more we let go, the more at peace we get with the world.
I want to quote one of those guru types right now.
Mm-hmm.
It says, "The ship is going by a mighty engine, and you are busy rowing."
Say that one more time.
Okay, this guru type guy. It's a phrase that triggered in my mind with you saying what you were saying. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the ship is going by a mighty engine, and you are busy rowing.
Yeah, just let go. Things are going to go its way. Yeah. And
Isn't that sorry, go on.
yeah. No, I was just going to say that's some old man shit right there.
Yeah. I mean, even though you can't control the winds and currents, though, like there may be some participation. Like maybe you can, what is it? Like you can't control the winds and currents, but you can adjust your sails.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So you're not completely at the whims of the world. you
Yeah.
know?
Because I think it'd be a big mistake to just, if since you know all that, that you just want to let go of every single thing and just not live life. I mean, like I said, if you're going to put on a VR headset to be Zelda, you might as well play the game. You want to get in there and be Zelda for real. You don't want to let go of shit. So
No one's as
that's,
good at being you as you are.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
You are the expert in that field.
Absolutely, man.
No matter what mistakes you think you've made, you are still the best at being you that ever there's been.
Yeah.
But I believe in God, Paul, and so do you.
Yes. So
You just don't know it.
No, I'm just referencing the CPA.
Oh,
position.
okay.
Saitan Bruggencate. That's one of
Yeah.
his lines.
Yeah.
I believe in the Christian God, and so do you.
Yeah. And so do you. It's been
Yeah.
revealed.
I mean, if you put nuances and caveats in front of it, I could say yes to that. But I mean, I
Yeah,
don't even
in a
know
sense,
what
yeah.
it means to be a Christian or to believe in the Christian God, because there's no singular. It's an umbrella, isn't it? There's so
Yeah.
many versions of. I mean, we go, oh, the God of the Bible. Okay, which version of the Bible?
It just
Which
happens to be the one I was raised to believe.
which interpretation?
Yeah.
Is this story meant to be literal history, literal science, or is it maybe telling us something about the human condition through symbolism? You
An
know,
allegory.
like there's no single one answer as far as I'm concerned. Is that my dog in the background? Yeah, oh yeah, I see my dog.
Yeah, man. I see him.
Seen him a few times now.
Yep.
Yeah, he's very interested in what's going on.
I like
Uh,
I think I forget which atheist it is asked Christians all the time, like, how do you know the Bible's about God?
hmm.
And they could never answer that really in a really coherent way. It's like, yeah, well, it says so at the very beginning. In the beginning, God created. Say, yeah, but how do you know that's about God and not about somebody's imagination or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I thought before that perhaps the God character was just an unnamed leader of a
Mhm.
particular culture, and was just
Mhm.
granted that identity. Just the same with Jesus, that Jesus wasn't an actual person; it was just a collective identity.
An idea, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm. That
Yeah, man.
reminds me of an
and that's
idea that I have heard before. Someone said like he appeared in a child, he appeared in a woman, he appeared in a, so it was less of like something focused on a particular individual, but it's more like a spirit that moved throughout a
Oh,
community.
yeah. Satan
yeah,
does the same thing.
the
Oh,
Buddha nature, really.
yes.
Yeah, Satan came as a snake. He came as a baby. Satan comes as an angel of light, when he needs to.
Mm.
Yeah,
I think there was a TV show about Satan. I forgot it was on Netflix. It was pretty good. It's about the devil came down to earth to do something, and it was pretty
I
cool.
didn't watch it, but I think it was called Lucifer.
Yeah, Lucifer. That's right.
Mm.
yeah. I didn't watch it
Yeah,
either, but I did see it.
yeah. I think it's a true story. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think that character is just an
All stories are
allegorical
false.
for.
Some stories are useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just allegorical to explain the troublesome side of the human condition. Our selfishness, our survival-driven behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Killing, stealing, all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, isn't that just the story of civilization, killing and stealing? Who gets who's the best at it?
Oh, yeah.
And
You
that's
know,
why we created examples to try to get away from all that. But apparently, many people haven't gotten the memo.
well, I lived in Germany for a while, and man, going into some of those castles was the most violent stuff you'd ever see. Like some of the artwork, it's just always people getting chopped up and God eating or the devil eating people, and Dante's Inferno, and all this sick
All
stuff.
that.
It's always something about death and war and people getting their heads cut off. It's like, wow, is that all these people thought about back then?
Well,
Yeah,
they didn't have Call of Duty. If they'd have had Call of Duty, they might have been all
Yeah.
right.
Oh, it went over big time.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to control, and then using the fear of death to drive that in, sink it in.
Yeah. And you can imagine death was so common back then. People really feared it
Yeah.
because most of your kids are going to die before they're even, born. There's
And I
so
think
much.
intuitively, I think intuitively that we do know that death is the end, and that's why grief is such a natural, automatic
Mhm,
instinct.
mhm.
So we try to create ideology that as a form of escapism,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
I
That
don't
can-
think it's in any way guaranteed that death is the end. I
I
think
think
that
it's just it's the end of this iteration.
yeah,
I
I
don't think that
there are a
it's
lot of
permanent.
folks that take the oblivion that awaits for granted. I think that there's a lot of wishful thinking in that.
Well, yeah, here's one theory, and this is actually a physicalist theory about afterlife. And what they say is in the eternal subjective is what they call it. That existence is eternal because your experience. There's no such thing as not experiencing. There's only experience. Not experiencing isn't anything. There's nothing to experience there. There's no quality to that. There's no quantity to that. So
Mhm.
experience as a phenomenon just continues.
Mhm.
We're the ones that create the identity, like the separation, the disassociation, but the subjectivity itself as a subjective phenomenon or whatever it is always is there to perceive something somehow, whether it's through an animal medium or a human medium or a brain or an electron, whatever. It's there to somehow perceive something at some level because that's what it does. It's always there. And so it's kind of like a physicalist view of it's almost like idealism or maybe it's more like panpsychism, I'd say. It's just that but it's also kind of consistent with any worldview, actually. If you really think about it, I guess. But it's pretty interesting.
Makes sense, yeah. Because even under my view, where it's cyclical, it's just ongoing.
Mm.
Each iteration just becomes a part of the greater whole.
Hmm. Well, you just look at the nature of experience. Like that's all it's there to do. You know, like if you say it's no longer there, well, you're not talking about anything. That's inconceivable. But anyways, man, it's getting a little late over here. I'm gonna get ready to hit the hay,
There.
man.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have a little laugh at that.
Morning meditation comes early around
Yeah,
these parts.
it's
I got up at
getting
5.
late there, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm what, a quarter of the world in front.
Yeah.
Much later for you. Sure.
Yeah, well, it's getting early here.
Yeah, man. You're like what, 8 hours ahead of Eastern time?
And I might start thinking breakfast soon. It's
Yeah.
the British summertime right now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. All right, man. I'm out.
Right.
Y'all be good, man.
Oh,
All right,
yeah.
gents. It's great
been-
discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been
A lot of
absolutely
fun.
amazing. Thank you, gentlemen. I really got
You
into
got
that.
it, man.